Okay, good morning and a warm welcome to the NADA Leader Performance Program Roadshow here in Umhlanga, KZN. To those of you who have made the attempt to get here in person, thank you very much. To all the people who are watching online, thank you for joining us. I was once told by Darren Scott, the legendary Boots and All host, after giving him a hard time in a Boots and All interview. And he said to me, "Mark, you have the perfect face for radio." He looked at me smugly, waiting for my retort, until I said to him, "Darren, you have the perfect body for a body bag." I must say I'm pretty sad that Darren's not doing the Supersport studio hosting. I think he was absolutely brilliant. But luckily enough, today we have another brilliant speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce you guys to Dr. Frans Cronje. I was chatting to him earlier. Very, very wise, very interesting guy. Frans is an independent political and economic analyst, known for his work on the political and socio-economic landscape of South Africa. He is an advisor to leading Fortune 500 companies, major banks and financial institutions, and some of the world's most influential governments. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Frans Cronje. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Good morning, everyone. I'm an analyst. I've been doing this stuff for 20 years, and I've been asked to do a few things for you this morning. One is to tell you what's going to happen in the election next year, who's going to win. I'm going to tell you the ANC, on the current data, will win the national election. They'll lose Gauteng, they'll lose KZN, and the Western Cape, the DA will keep. And this province and Gauteng will go into coalition government. I'll tell you what's going to happen to government policy broadly afterwards. I'm going to tell you there are going to be no significant shifts to what's happening with debt deficit, major policy reforms and the like. That will pretty much stay as it is. I've been asked to talk to you about load shedding. I'll take you into a lot of the data and all of this. I'm going to tell you a call that's now almost a year old for me, and it's very good that we're at stage 6 this morning, because you can see whether I actually stick to these calls or not. The load shedding prognosis for the country will improve dramatically, and into the first quarter of next year we should be between stage 0 and stage 2, and I'll show you the argument on that. And then I was asked to look a little bit at your industry and what drives it and behavior and the like, and I'm going to tell you that one thing we saw is household debt levels are at their lowest point in 15 years. I'm also going to tell you that I think rate cuts are likely on the agenda. The early rate cutters are Brazil, Chile and Poland. They've all cut by about 75 basis points in the last month. South Africa will later follow. And if I'm right on my load shedding call, we're going to see a modest lift in economic performance. And if all these things come together, national government stability, bit of a rate cut, low household debt levels, less load shedding, improved sentiment, the environment that you operate in. It's not going to be amazing. It's not going to be what it was between 2004 and 2007. It's going to be better than it was today. So that's where we're going. How do I substantiate that? You're going to see a lot of charts this morning. This first one's the politics. The years run from 94 to 2023, and initially out to 2019. It's got the asterisks. These are the national elections that have happened. Then after that, I'll tell you what's there. Let's start with the ANC. 94, it's got 63%. A decade later, 2004, something important is happening. It's got more than when Mandela led it in South Africa to liberation at the end of apartheid. And the reason for that, I'll show you in a few charts' time, is massive improvements in the basic living standards of people, which is the sole major driver of political behavior in the country. Liberation, loyalty, voting, historical ANC loyalty, these are very secondary drivers of voter behavior. Primary driver is living standards. As living standards slip past the financial crisis in 2008 and into Mr. Zuma's era of governance, ANC support slips with that. We'll show you the cause and effect on that in a while. 2019, they're down below 60% for the first time. 2021, it's a local government election. Can't compare that to a national election. They're different animals. But you can look at it, and psychologically, a hell of a thing has happened, because they're below 50. And that just opens up the public mind to alternative country futures. And you'll see a lot of poll data this morning. Show you the extent. I'll show you just how far advanced ANC voter thinking has become. 70% of ANC voters now think that they should make a deal with smaller parties to govern the country, even a bit ahead of leader opinion. After that, from 2002, these are polls. You can compare this to a national government, to a national election. And last year, the ANC is bouncing around just under 50%. And this year, they're averaging just over 50% again. They tend to surge before an election. And if I'm right on the load shedding call that I'll show you later, they win the next election in the 50s. I think analysts should make hard calls. I don't think they should sit on the fence and tell you, well, maybe they'll win and maybe they'll lose. And they should be judged on their calls, and sometimes they can get it wrong. My call for you is the ANC is going to win. There's the DA. Small beginnings, rapid growth, whoops in 2019. They're down. For the first time, they don't grow. But under John Steenhuisen, they're up to 23, 24, 25%. And that's what they should get next time round. And they're looking super strong in the Western Cape as well. So they'll keep the Western Cape. They'll probably grow their majority in the Western Cape. The EFF chaps struggle to break well through the 10% mark. We've had them as high as 12 in 2022 polling. 2023, they're way down. Political opinion, voter opinion, moves in a wave-like motion from day to day and week to week. People don't hold the same view all the time. And we know that there are about 3-4 percentage points that are traded between the ANC and the EFF every day. What might have happened this year, we might have hit the EFF at lows and the ANC at highs in that trading relationship. But you saw the flop of the EFF stay away, and you saw the massive effort they had to go to fill that stadium in Johannesburg. And I'm going to show you party brands later on, and the EFF's key problem is that its brand is violence and anarchy, and that doesn't work as a political message because it's anger. Anger never works in politics in the long term because anger abates. And if you want to get voters out, your messaging has to be very much more positive than that. And there are the other parties, and something along those lines. EFF perhaps a bit above 10. The others perhaps down a bit from their 16 is the result that you're likely to see on the current trends next year. But check in with me from time to time. We test this very often. If it changes ahead of May next year, you'll know. Why is the ANC losing? There's an idea out there that everything's gone terribly wrong. Our politics is failing. This is a disaster. I read a document this week written by serious people which said that we are now a failed state. And I don't think that works. Politically, what's happening here is perfectly normal and exactly how the system is designed to work. Here's a chart, 94 to 2025. The black line looks like a sort of pyramid. You read off the left-hand axis, it's ANC support in national elections. So you see the 73 rising to almost 70 and then falling back down to the 58. On top of that, that orange line with the red dots is growth in the country's economy. And at first, when you look at it, you think maybe these two things are related. Now, you must be skeptical of analysts like myself. You must try not to believe anything we tell you. It's the best advice. If despite your skepticism, you can't get away from the feeling that maybe this stuff is right, then perhaps you've got the information to start making some decisions around. So let's test this thesis and what drives ANC support a little bit further. It's another chart, essentially also, it starts in 96, but it's essentially also 94. And there's the ANC pyramid off the left-hand axis, 63 to 70 to 58. This time there is a little dotted line, which looks like little ants walking across the screen. This is the number of people in the country with a job, and you read that line off the right-hand axis. In the early days of our democracy, that number, if you scroll all the way across, is about 7 million people go to work every day, formal sector and informal sector. Towards the middle of the chart, let's go to 2007-8 when it has that little bump in the peak. Mr. Mbeki is just about to be deposed. The number is almost 15 million. The number of people with a job doubles in our first decade as a democracy. But even today, you'll read, even in the business press, that Mandela and Mbeki later on, especially Mbeki, presides over an era of jobless growth, and it's just wrong on the facts of it. And that happens a lot in my experience working with various firms, is that the sort of information you pick up for free in the mainstream media is often a storyline that's very different from the reality if you do the serious analysis and look at the data. So we don't have an era of jobless growth. And look what happens to ANC support. It's gone up, and there's the thesis. Go on 15 years after 2007-8, and there's virtually zero net new job creation for a decade. And ANC support is falling away. Had we maintained the economic growth rates of the first decade, we would again have doubled the number of people in employment. And the official unemployment rate that's today 33 or so percent would have been about 10%. And the country would have been a completely different place. And your figures would have looked very different to what they look like. I mean, there have been, it's even hard to comprehend how good it might have been in an industry like yours. The solid orange line with little red dots is the number of social grants paid every month. And in 90 early years of democracy, it's 2.5, 3 million. By the time Mbeki leaves, it's about, I don't know how much is that, 12, 13 million. And then it takes off to about 20. In 2008-9, it overtakes the number of people who go to work every day. And then you see the leap at the end, which is the 350 Rand grant that comes out of the back end of COVID. Now, if you poll grants and voter perception of grants, they're a double-edged sword. Initially, voters are quite positive about grants. But now voters have come to resent grants. And we've done a lot of focus group work, and I run a small polling group that tests public opinion. And we've tested grant opinion, and you won't see many politicians in this next election say, we'll give you more grants. Because if you say that on the stage, people throw stones at you. And the view on the 350 Rand grant is this: we take it, of course, because otherwise living standards are lower. But this is pathetic, that this is the best 30 years in that a government can offer, is a 350 Rand grant. So it's become it started to hurt ANC support. You see that support falling away. Test this one more time. 94 to 2024. There's the ANC pyramid, and what you're looking at, the ANC pyramid's off the left, of course. What you're looking at off the right is the share of, think of them as families that go to bed every night without electricity. And on our first night as a democracy, half of families in the country, 50%, go to bed without electricity. A decade later, 2004, it's 2 in 10. It's 20%. And the storyline again, that service delivery failed so terribly, and that was why Mbeki was deposed. Crap, didn't happen. It was actually very successful. So successful, and I was once told I'm better at pro-ANC propaganda than Mac Maharaj when he was Jacob Zuma's spokesperson. And there aren't emerging markets that can beat what the ANC did in its first decade in raising the basic living standards of people. However, for 15 years, we're going nowhere, and the party's getting punished. Part of that punishment is the world of protests. It's 97 to 2021. The black line, you read off the left-hand axis, is the number of protest actions that take place in the country in any given year. 6,000 hits 16,000. Of course, during COVID, you can't protest much because you're locked up. The data in the manner that it's collected by a state agency, is such that towards the middle of this era, as the police's public order units are overwhelmed, the quality of the data collection weakens, which means that the figure, if someone said to me that your 16,000 figure is actually 30,000, I wouldn't go to war in arguing that with them. It's definitely going up a lot. More important is the orange line. What share of those protests are violent protests? And that figure sat at a low around 10% into about 2008, 9, 10. So remember what's happening there. ANC support is rising in elections. We've doubled the number of people with jobs. We've rolled out this enormous welfare system, done a few other things I'll show you later. As that breaks, the protest movement takes off. Protests are a very good thing because they're a pressure release valve. A silly former police commissioner said, when he comes in, he's not going to tolerate this nonsense anymore. And that's how you create a kind of North Africa or the like. Free societies don't change violently because political change always pursues the line of least resistance. In around 2012, I was a member of a team who made the call that the ANC will lose its national majority in the election of 2024. And we meant a national election. I think they just scraped through, but they did, I suppose, lose in 2019 already. And we made that call based on what we were beginning to see in this protest line. That the predictable behavior in a free society is you vote for a government that you like. When it starts to fail you, you get out on the streets and you say, this isn't going well. Hear us. When the government ignores you, protests will become more and more and more and more, and they'll become more violent. When that doesn't work, you go back to the ballot box and you vote again. And we're now in the early stages of that return to the ballot box, which is how the country will likely change, and the prognosis of violent overthrow and insurrection doesn't work. In your unique case here of Natal, there were unique circumstances. I don't buy the insurrection piece. I'm quite well informed on what happened behind the scenes in your violence. It doesn't meet the definitional threshold of an attempt to overthrow the government and replace it with something else. You had a massive riot that was egged on by a few hotheads, but is simply actually a continuation of the violent protest trend line. And you will continue to see this, and it will continue into the next decade, high levels of violent protest action. But if you think where we started, you think what you survived here, I can tell you some of my American clients looking at some of the YouTube clips said to me, holy crap. And here you all sit today, and many of you run very, very successful businesses in a fairly stable environment. You can beat that, and you can beat a plague, and you can beat running out of electricity for 6 or 8 hours a day, and you can still be sitting in this room today. You're probably going to make it in the long term. What the political data I've shown you in the ANC at 50% conceals is this amazing stat. If only urban people voted, and today, the ANC and the EFF together, they're in gold, I put them together, would get 45%. The ANC on its own in urban South Africa would get 30% today. It has lost the urban aspirant middle class. Amongst people who work or have graduated high school, let alone have a university degree or own anything of any value, the ANC is under 50 with all of those, and they won't get that back again. In rural South Africa, the ANC does better. It sits about 70 and the EFF at about 10. And that's fine, because rural South Africa is populated by an older, poorer demographic of black South Africans who grew up black under apartheid. And for them, that experience is sufficient to sustain their support for the ANC through to the end. But that demographic is getting smaller due to immigration and the mortality rate, because it's an older demographic. And that population will fall away so fast over the next 10 to 15 years that the ANC is on its way to somewhere between 30 and 40% at the end of this decade, just on the demographic forecast, because it's lost this urban middle class. And what's sort of called the moonshot guys, we'll talk about them a bit, the moonshot guys would now win if we were just urban. We'd split the country in half, a rural country and an urban country. Moonshot guys would win the election in the urban country. And it shows how very far the political evolution in the country has moved. And in fact, how the system works. It is shambolic and chaotic. Countries change in two ways. Shambolic, chaotic, democratic transitions, or anarchic, violent conflicts. And we are in the very fortunate minority of emerging markets where our route to change will most likely be a chaotic democratic transition. The alternative is truly terrible, and the prospects of that are, as long as we remain a free society, actually quite low. Another good thing is that the perceptions of voters are really shrewd and sharp. They get it. This is a word association exercise. You say to voters, I'll put a word or a phrase to you, forget who you vote for, or who you like or don't like, or we're going to just say a word and you tell us which party you thought of. So the EFF will be in gold, the DA in orange, and the ANC in blue. So we say best at service delivery. And who did you think of? And of all voters, just over a third say the ANC. But remember, 50% are going to vote for the ANC, so there's something going on here that I'll explain. The DA gets a third too, but a bigger third than the ANC's third. But it's going to get less votes than the ANC in the next election. Something's happened. I'll explain this. And the EFF doesn't get much. Which party breaks its promises, lies to you? The ANC gets 75%. That was your brand in your business. How do you get out of that? You can't. It's almost impossible to escape. And read that back to the urban vote. The DA doesn't, and the EFF correctly is very honest, because the EFF says exactly what it plans to do, and it stays on message all the time, and it means it. And then which party is violent, would create a violent, anarchic future? And it's not so much the ANC, the DA, which is probably correct, and the EFF at 70%. And you might, in the mob, like the kind of nationalist rhetoric of the EFF, but when you sit down to make that cross, you don't vote for it. That's likely to remain the case as well. The broader opposition, for which the DA is a bit of a proxy here, has therefore already won a very important battle that a plurality of voters think it's probably better at running the country than the ANC. So why don't they vote for it? There are two reasons. One is voters say they're afraid of the ANC losing and the consequences the next morning. Massive violence, instability, the loss of social grants, whatever. Second reason is more sophisticated, but one the opposition must pay close attention to. The perception is that even if they're better, the opposition create insider-outsider societies. Very comfortable kind of golf estate, country club worlds for the elites, and a periphery that we, now thinking as that outsider, live on. And they might tell us, which they sometimes do in the opposition, our peripheries are better than the ANC's peripheries. We have more electricity, less sewage in the streets, and our shacks are of a higher standard. But you're asking someone then, this is what the opinion work says, you're asking someone to vote for what feels a lot like a 400-year-old colonial dynamic. And that's very, very hard to do. These two reasons are what keeps currently, it's a third of the ANC voter base inside the ANC. Remove those two reasons, the ANC's down to its 35, and that's going to happen in the next decade, and pretty likely. ANC voters are very open-minded about what might need to be done to turn the country around. The question this time is, things may change, there might be future governments, and the ANC might have to make a lot of very difficult decisions. So we're testing how difficult these are. I'm not saying these are the right policy prescriptions or the wrong ones. Let's just see how far their voters would go. So the ANC might actually have to give up on its majority and work with other parties to govern the country in a coalition. It might have to scrap the minimum wage. We don't want fence-sitting answers. We want to make it explicit. One of the great gains, the victories over the apartheid system, was the labour regulatory system. Are ANC voters prepared to give that up now? The hire on merit alone in the civil service, so we test the hot racial stuff, and then the same one, scrap BEE. ANC voters, blue is support. Joining a coalition is 75%. That means their heads are already past the point where their party retains control of the country. And if you're an ANC strategist, you should be fired for this. But you mustn't. It's like your client who's already thinking about your competitor's business. He probably should be there already. Your marketing guys have failed terribly. Scrap the minimum wage, splits 50, and then the racial stuff, essentially, that's the opposing, splits 50-50, and it's extraordinary that these issues, such as hard won, if you come out of the ANC family, hard won ideological victories over the former regime, your own voters would now have agreed to surrender some of these things. It shows how it's indicative of how far voter opinion has moved, much further than the opinion of business leaders or of political leaders, many political leaders in the country. Load shedding, I've told you it's going to get a lot better and kind of go away. A fire has been lit under the arse of the ANC when this stuff came out. Has load shedding, it will be on the left, made you reconsider voting for the ANC, and only ANC voters get the answers of only for them. Then on the right, if it has made you reconsider, will you vote for it if the lights are out at the next election? 4 in 10 say it's weighing on me, because load shedding is such a vivid thing. The lights are actually off. The politician can't tell you they're on. because they are rules. Politicians can tell you all sorts of nonsense, and if you talk enough, you might be confused enough not to know what's going on. Load shedding is black and white, on and off. And a quarter of the 40, so 10% of all ANC voters, say they will drop the party if the lights are off. And that means it would then go to under 50. And this had certainly an inspirational effect. Understand how we got into this mess. This data runs from 1990. It's the amount of electricity in gigawatt hours generated every year. And the data, if you're a data person, is really beautiful numbers, because you see a repeat of a pattern. And the pattern is winter and summer in South Africa. From around 98, no, let's say 98, 98's the Asian crisis. After that, South Africa stages a very strong economic recovery, and electricity consumption and therefore production takes off. But since, late 2007, year on year, we've been producing less electricity. And if I plot your sales against this chart, I didn't show that one to you. These things relate quite closely to each other. The reason it's gone down relates to this data. I'll just show it to you for 10 years, 2011 to 2023. Off the left-hand axis, a number Eskom calls the energy availability factor. This is what share of its plant and equipment is producing electricity. And it used to be about 80%, and it fell to a low point of just on 50%. And then after the exit of Andre de Ruyter, who had many merits and was a good person, it has taken off again under the new minister. And it was on his departure and the new minister in charge that my group's call became, we'll get out of load shedding. But it required his departure. The reason the availability factor is falling is what's happening on the right-hand axis with the unplanned outage factor, which is a beautiful term developed by some clever bureaucrat. It's what share of plant and production has broken down and caught us off guard. And that was 5%, and it took off to about 30% as the maintenance of the coal fleet was just allowed to slide away. And that has turned around. This minister's a very, very clever chap. Next, okay, so we know what happened over 20 years, 30 years, and we know why it got dark, because the stuff started breaking down. And now let's look at what we can do to turn it around. In the first quarter of this year, we had potential generating capacity of about 45,000 megawatts of coal, and then about 2 to 3 to 4 of hydro pump storage, gas turbines, which are the diesel turbines, solar and wind, nuclear, and import. So immediately there's a coal is where the action is. Of that potential, this was the actual production that was taking place. Coal was functioning at a third of its potential. Hydro was at about half, could be a bit better, can't really go much over half, but you've got to pump it up during the day and then it would run down at night. Gas, they weren't buying diesel to run the gas turbine. That's 2 stages of load shedding. Solar and wind was fine. Nuclear was at half because one of the units at Kuiberg is out for maintenance, will be back in, and then imports were a little bit. So this is what we were doing. But what you're immediately drawn to is this huge 30,000 megawatts that's sitting in the coal fleet that's not working. Now 1,000 megawatts is one stage of load shedding. At the moment we're at stage 6. There's 30,000 of coal that's broken. There's a green argument that, well, this is the great opportunity to do the green transition, but it's not going to work. And in our case, for many reasons, including flaws in green tech, but we've got a harder reason, and that is the nature of our electrical grid. These are the provinces from the Eastern Cape to the Western Cape, and what I'm showing you is the megawatts. Remember, 1,000 megawatts is one stage of load shedding, of surplus capacity on the electrical transmission lines in various provinces. The grid is built for the coal fleet, so it runs from the north down to the south. You see that with the KZN, 6,000 megawatt surplus capacity. In Mpumalanga, 6,000. Gauteng sitting at over 4,000. But in the Northern Cape, meaning energy that runs from the high solar radiation west of the country into the east, there is no capacity at all. And there are even some, I think it's completely mad, ideas around now that South Africa should borrow money to build a new grid that runs from the west to the east so that we can build the green plants to solve the load shedding problem. And then this is taken seriously in the business press. And I think it's quite mad. What the new minister wants to do is much better idea. This is the production numbers for coal and hydro and everything in February of 2023, first quarter of this year. The proposed intervention is to put 3,000 of coal back into operation by refitting and doing proper maintenance of it. Buying enough diesel to run the gas turbines, which isn't happening today. I think they even on a day like, I don't know what they do today at 6, but last week the gas turbines were running at about 15% of their potential because of the fear of the diesel price. Solar and wind will get another 1,000, and nuclear, our second reactor, goes online. And the effect of that is that overall, within 12 months, the original first quarter production figures of about 23,000 megawatts, we add 6 to it, we go to 30, cancels out 6 stages of load shedding. We're comfortably between stage 0 and stage 2. That is now the Cabinet's objective, and the Minister is pursuing it. The former management of the electrical system did not buy this plan. They wanted to let the coal fleet continue to slide and use that as pressure to replace it with new green transmission. And that was the wrong strategy and caused the load shedding is not caused by corruption in the main. Corruption is a big problem. Load shedding is caused by lack of maintenance of the coal fleet for a decade, followed by a strategy to abandon the coal fleet, which is nuts. This is much better, and if the Minister sticks with it, we're out of load shedding. On 60 months, the strategy is along these lines. There's first quarter of this year coal production. The intervention is to add 15,000 megawatts to coal, which is refitting a third of the coal fleet. And the refitment is there's a coal plant, a big thing, and a team of auditors goes in and sees what's wrong with it and order the parts that are broken, replace those parts. Takes about 3 years if you do it slowly. And as an Eskom chap said to me, but they were very nervous about talking on this, light those old plants up and they're going to work. It's not pretty, it'll be the most polluting things on earth, but they're going to work. And if they stick with that plan, and tell Washington and Brussels to bugger off, and let us solve our energy problem so we can start solving our economic and political problem, the effect is that by the end of the decade, we can, you can do this in 5 years. By the end of the decade, let's say the government's going to try and do it. It's going to take twice as long as it should. We're at 45,000 megawatts of production. Keep that number in mind. This is a forecast of how much we need from an energy perspective to get the economic growth rate back to emerging market averages of 4 to 5%, so 5%, over 10 years. The low estimate is an economy with a heavily regulated labour market, but a relatively high skills base. And we need to lift production from year 1 at 30,000. Remember, currently it's 23. I said to you we can close that gap within a month, within a year to 30. Currently it's 23, close that in a year to 30. Then we can, from an energy perspective, aspire to higher rates of growth. We have to take that up to about 35. The more likely, the high estimate, is a less skilled labour market in a difficult labour policy environment. You create a lot of industrial jobs that absorb a lot of megawatts. We need to take that up to 45,000, which is a number that comes back to the potential number of refitting a third of the coal fleet, which is the Cabinet's current policy, for which you get zero credit in the business community, which is shameful. And that's where we were in the first quarter. If they stick with this, load shedding becomes a lot less of a problem for you than it's been. And load shedding is so devastating an influence on public opinion and sentiment and consumer sentiment that it's relief. Even if it goes to stage 2, people think it's miraculous. The government's hugely successful. The country has electricity almost all the time. And you'll be a beneficiary of that. This is the, from 94, economic growth performance of the country. So it doesn't look very dramatic, but it is. Particularly when you kind of focus in on 2000 to 2007, when we're ramping up to 5% growth and then averaging 5% between 2004 and 2007, you'll see your data in a moment. You did really well then. Then it falls away. And the forecast to 2025 is the consensus mainstream economist forecast in the country at the moment. Our view is different. If I just focus in on the tail, the right-hand tail of that chart, so go from 2021. That's the consensus view. We're lucky to stay in positive territory. Remove the load shedding constraint, as is possible, we can go to a very modest 2%. We'll be growing now at about 40% of the average rate of emerging markets around the world. It's not what it was when you were doing so well, but it's better, and I think that's on the way for you. You'll also be fortunate that the government is in many respects sane. This is 1913, the early years of the Union of South Africa. The current government remains sane, projected to 2027. And what I'm showing you is the budget deficit. That's the difference between what the government spends and what it earns. And if it's negative, it spends more than it earns, which governments around the world do. And it's a political history of the country. That first deep deficit is the First World War. The second deep deficit, there sort of a quarter of the way into the chart, is the Second World War. And the pain and suffering inherent in the deficit is instrumental to explaining Smuts' defeat in 1948 and everything that came after that. Then very high rates of economic growth play out in the 1960s and early 70s, and we're the world's biggest gold producer with a massive gold price. And we're carried by this commodity bonus. It conceals the contradiction of apartheid, of a growing economy trying to exclude most of its people from the benefits. We've become unmasked with the political violence of the 1970s. And then right at the bottom there, some of you will remember, because it was here, in August of 1985, when Pierre Botha said, "To hell with reform." His quote, I mean, you can see where the deficits predict government collapses, because states have run out of the money to meet the expectations of their supporters. And Botha, in the midst of that, appears in Durban, and a quote from that night to his National Party comrades is, "I will not lead white South Africa down the path of abdication and suicide. We won't let this change our policy." And of course it forces a change. Things reverse under the ANC, which from 94, 13 years into 2007-8, record the first budget surplus in 100 years. This is arch fiscal conservatism. This stuff is hugely controversial in Western capitals. This ex-Soviet inspired East German house liberation movement pulled it off here. And they were motivated by that important motivator, which was that Mandela told them early on, borrow in dollars and the West has us. And they'll dictate the budget speech from Washington. And we better grow our way out of the mess that the whites left behind, economic mess, the Nats, because otherwise the revolution is over. And that inspired that behavior. Surplus is recorded, and then you get the financial crisis, and then the Zuma years. And now you get these little orange bars. Now this is the finance minister, Enoch Godongwana, heroic in many respects, because what you should do, if you truly are a kind of decrepit, slightly authoritarian, Soviet-inspired African liberation movement, is as you face political defeat, you print money. And you print money so that you can create inflation, so that you can create desperation amongst people to use to fuel populism to override democratic institutions. This is how you do it. The chap in the Union Buildings is trying to secure a primary budget surplus. It's absolutely astonishing. And there is the debt curve. This is government debt as a share of GDP. Off the right-hand axis, 48% on the last evening of apartheid, 27% 13 years later. Zuma and Mr. Gordhan, who's finance minister through a lot of this era, signed a lot of checks, a lot of IOUs. And that's the effort of the current finance minister now. And that's really important. Now, everyone misses this. A lot of people miss this. The ANC is hopeless at running the country, conceded. But there are also elements of deep pragmatism sitting inside it, and this is an example of that. Further, more positive than not, is that we are past our inflation peak. That's the headline inflation number for South Africa from 2013. The snarl up of COVID supply chains has washed out of our economy as out of the global economy, and inflation is moving back into its target zone. The producer price index, which is the inflation for producers, got wholly out of whack with the supply chain snarl ups of COVID. It's fighting its way down. It's the first. If you sit in the central bank and you do your tick list of when can we cut rates, this is the first thing you watch, and that's pro-rate cut now. Second is household debt to the disposable income of households. This is what share of household income has to go to debt servicing. 30 years ago it was 50%, and it took off from 94 to 2007 as interest rates were cut in half. If you're older here, you'll remember 20% interest rates, which your younger colleagues will think was impossible. It couldn't be such a thing, but it was. As rates are cut in half, off low household debt levels, consumers borrow a lot, and your sales just absolutely fly off. As that hits the global financial crisis, banks get jittery, quite rightly, and think, holy crap, we're headed for... And lending just gets cinched down. And the effect of cinching lending down is that household debt levels tail off, and very few consumer companies or industries see, in my experience, is that household debt levels are way off what they were. They were 15 points off their peak 15 years ago. That means there's a little bit of wiggle room coming back into household borrowing capacity. You haven't seen that yet because of what's happening to interest rates. That's the repo rate. Post the crisis with the 2008, things got a bit out of whack running into that crisis. But you've been out of this crisis through a rate hike cycle, which means you haven't yet seen this effect of this lower household debt level. If I'm right and you now see rate cuts, like the Poles and the Brazilians and so on are doing, you're going to see a little bit of new life move into your industry. Match that with load shedding a bit better, and the ANC actually winning the election, meaning that not a great deal changes in the country. The environment starts to look a bit nicer. Now let's look at you yourselves. From 94, new passenger car sales, I think these are daily numbers that were done by a young economist colleague for me, and that is interest rates. And I don't know much about your industry, but so it's quite useful in a sense. But as rates fall, you lift. As rates pick up, you slow. It's predictable every time. In the previous crisis of 2008, look at that pattern compared to the COVID crisis pattern. If you're on YouTube, you don't see what I'm doing in the room, but I'm just going to show the people in the room. Through the previous, there's the financial crisis. So the world is lifting interest rates. Stress can't be handled, triggers an economic collapse. The economic collapse coincides with interest rates falling to all-time record lows, meaning that the delayed purchasing decisions are matched with low rates, and you see a vast recovery. Your pattern after COVID is different, because you've got the crisis, you see a short period of lower rates, and then as rates take off, you don't actually have a recovery. It looks like a recovery, but it's a correction back to where you were before. Drop rates now, you see your little orange line should fight its way upwards a little bit again. Stay with passenger car sales. There's the number again. I think this is now monthly sales probably. And this is household debt to disposable income. And what it shows is where households are unwilling to make debt. There's a huge lift in debt levels. Look, if debt's off the right-hand axis, 50% goes to 75%. Look what happens to your sales at the same time. Through your high interest, households don't make debts through increasing interest rate cycles. Change that, and you'll be able to tap a little bit of that, as I've told you 3 times now. Car sales again for you versus consumer confidence. And you're a perfect, you're a stats guy, it's like amazing. You are like a consumer confidence index all on your own. And confidence is itself, on the next chart, tied so closely to interest rates. There's consumer confidence, there's the repo rate. As the interest rate lifts, consumer confidence falls away. That's what's happening to you at the moment. And I think you'll see into next year some cutting. The last thing the governor of the bank looks at and his assessors before they cut is what's happening to the currency. And the reason is that to keep the rand at its current levels or not allow dramatic weakening, we need to retain an interest rate differential between ourselves and the United States on our bonds. The reason for that is we don't get much fixed investment into South Africa because government policy is hostile to investment. To create demand for rands, and therefore to keep the rand at its current levels, not allow it to weaken, we need a sort of hot flow of carry trade money that flows into the country. And you commit that speculative cash if the interest rate you're earning here is a lot higher than the interest rate you'd be earning in what's seen as a relatively safe United States. The difference in those rates is called the interest rate differential. And you can see through the crisis how the 2000 and in the early 2020s how that spikes, but come back to the present. The differential is about 8 points. That's what it costs to coax money into the country. We've got to spend 8 points more. At that level, the currency generally should remain fairly stable if it stays there. If other emerging markets start to cut rates, and then the US does the same, that's the last marker you need to see to anticipate rate cuts happening here as well. And on top of the rate differential, I put the actual currency for you just to show that this does work. As the rate differential narrows, the currency moves in the opposite direction and does so every time. So they just need to watch that. That's the last marker. Then you get the rate cuts here. Last one on the currency, which the bank will look at this as well. What are commodity prices saying about the strength of the rand? Now you've got two indicators here. The orange one is the commodity price index. It's an average index off the left-hand axis of global commodity prices as a whole. And the second black line is the value of the rand itself. Rand seen as somewhat of a commodity and as a commodity currency. When commodity prices fall sharply, let's go from 2010 down to about 2016, the rand weakens. You'll see the index on the rand on the right is reverse index. Zeros at the top, 20s at the bottom. When commodity prices strengthen, the rand strengthens a little bit as well. The weakness in the rand into 2023 is following the release of the snarl up of supply chains and hence shipping costs and commodity prices after the COVID crisis. If that little worm is correct in telling us that we've averaged out on commodity prices, the bank will see that it can now look at the interest rate differential to make the call on cutting rates here, and you draw the benefits from that. So I think you are an industry that's going to have a better year next year than you had this year. Last chart, and then I'll give you my summary. This is net confidence in the future of the country. So it's an indicator where you ask people, are you confident about the future, or do you think we're going to fail? The difference is the people, it shows you the extent of negativity. When I started as an analyst 20 years ago, this was a positive figure. When Mr. Ramaphosa came to power, the figure was already at around negative 40, and it stayed there for his first year or so in the ANC, and then 2019 after that election. Through COVID it collapsed to around negative 70. And that general negativity I'd think would feed into perceptions of people who buy sort of long-term commitments of buying a car. If I'm right therefore that the election result next year does not deliver chaos, but a degree of certainty, if some degree of disappointment for some people too, load shedding gets a bit better, and interest rates reduce the pressure on households, you're going to see this indicator lift a little bit too, and you'll draw the benefits of that. So my hard calls for you, these are the ones. ANC wins next year. Might need one or two small proxy parties to help it through. Gauteng and KZN are governed by chiefly centrist coalitions. The ANC in Gauteng in Natal last night sent out a note to say no critical comments about Buthelezi, because we want to make, it didn't say the second part, we want to make a deal with Inkatha next year. to govern the province. Fiscal policy remains pragmatic. We're not going to see debt blowouts or massive printing. Interest rates drop, consumer confidence up, economic growth sub 2%. I think that's what you can look forward to. And thank you very much. That's it from me. We have questions, so do fire away.
Sorry.
Who leads the ANC? Must they talk through a mic? Or should I just repeat the question?
So who's going to lead the ANC after Ramaphosa?
I don't know. I mean, in the line of succession, it should probably be Paul Mashatile. It doesn't. It matters, of course, quite a lot, but if you look at that urban vote number, and you look at the precarious, the ANC doesn't have enough electricity to get out of trouble. It can stop the load shedding, but it can't really grow the place by much. It doesn't have the money to meet the expectations of its supporters. It's too hemmed in by debt. The best of its leaders are long gone. Internationally, its credibility is shot. The urban aspirant middle class has abandoned it completely. So whoever takes it over has two things will happen to that person. The first is they will drop the policy of trying to unite the ANC with itself, and they'll try and make a deal with the centrist opposition party, realizing that ANC support's on its way to 35% in a decade. And the country's politics becomes a centrist cosmopolitan party, the kind of people who vote for the DA. Might not be under the DA, it might be 25%. A sort of aspirant middle class, ex-rural, emerging middle class party, 35%, and then lots of rats and mice, smaller parties around. If they pick that option, they can remain relevant to the growing urban future electorate and have a significant say in how South Africa is governed. The alternative is not to make that deal with the centrists, instead to double down on your rural constituency and perhaps make some sort of deal with the EFF. If that's the choice that's made, you're now merging the brand of dishonesty and corruption, which is the ANC brand, with the EFF brand of anarchy and violence. And politically, you can't get anywhere with that. And the collective sinks, the EFF ANC collective sinks very far, and it becomes a regional rural party centered around Mpumalanga, Northwest Limpopo, with an older demographic. And over 10 years or so, its relevance to South African politics disappears completely. I don't know which of the two choices he's likely to make. But there is a current dispute, conflict within the ANC, which way to go.
Can I ask that one last question? So I'm hugging the mic here, and I'm going to speak just now anyway. Why has the ANC aligned themselves with Russia and seem to have gone against the West? Economically, those are our biggest trading partners.
Well, I don't think they have aligned themselves with Russia. They're incompetent. They vastly value their relationship with the US and Europe and AGOA. AGOA, I've been in America for 8 weeks. There's bipartisan support for AGOA. There might be a little bit of holding the ANC's feet to the fire and maybe some token moves on threatening AGOA, but AGOA stays, essentially. It's fine. I could find very few people in Washington who told me they thought AGOA should be scrapped. The day after Ambassador Brigatier's press conference, the ANC scurried around like headless chickens trying to get the telephone number of the Americans to say, we want to come and talk to you. The naval exercises that occurred, and then the Lady R ship that occurred in the same kind of period of time, were probably not initiatives of the ANC itself. They were probably initiatives that might have been geared at trying to make South Africa a problem on Capitol Hill in Washington. So that some of the hothead American senators and congressmen, of which there are now some, would say, this is a terrible place and we need to punish it. And what can we do? Well, we scrap a goer. Which has the effect of hounding the ANC deeper into essentially the Chinese orbit. The ANC don't want that because they're not dumb. They understand that dependency on China is going to be rough. You can get a lot more concessions out of guilt-ridden Westerners than you're going to get out of China. They're not going to give you anything. And I said at the time of this to a South African politician of seniority, your problem now is foreign affairs is so useless that you can't communicate any idea properly to the West, let alone as complex an idea as what is going on with Russia. And what the ANC actually desires, which I think is perfectly fine, is to say we value our relationship with our Western trade partners, but we want to have the relationship with Russia that we choose to have. And we don't want Americans and Germans arriving here telling us that you can't talk to the Russians. Pisses us off. And I think that's perfectly fine and fair. And my advice to Americans has been, you guys in the ANC are going to agree on 6 or 7 out of 10 things. This is not one of those, so cut it out of your relationship and put it aside. It's not as if we're going to change the outcome of the war, despite our best efforts. And I think so my answer to you is that it wishes to pursue, the ANC would love to pursue the foreign policy of India. The Indians play the one off against the other and don't really take sides. But it's incompetent. The quality of our ambassadors around the world is shocking in its ineptitude. And when you don't even have an ambassador who's present in Washington, which has been the case now for about 8 weeks, you can't communicate, and then you become the victim, because of your own fault, of the story that you are anti-Western and pro-Russian. And I don't think I'm naive, but I don't think that's what they are. And they work very hard to save AGOA because they don't want to be dependent on the Chinese and the Russians.
Franz, can I ask you a question? Do you think the ANC government have any plans in place to stop the systematic dismantling of infrastructure through criminal activity, cutting down street lights, all those type of things? Do they have some sort of plan in place? Because that is just more investment that's got to be put back into to fix these, and then that money could have been spent elsewhere. Do you think they have a plan?
No, I don't think they have a plan in place for that. I think there's a plan in place for load shedding because of its urgent, immediate political consequences, and there's a plan in place on the budget because of its immediate, urgent consequences. They don't be much beyond that. I think the ANC's thinkers are now in a headspace of who they're going to make deals with in future, and that their defeat is assured, and nothing can stop it, which is correct, I think. Short of destroying the democratic infrastructure, which they show no sign of attempting to do, because the first sign is printing money, and they're not doing that. I think there's the thinking is beyond that we can do it, and we're going to have to make the best deal that we can and then see what we can do. Along the way, create more space for the private sector to do more. The negotiations on rail, for example, are a mess. And the government, I can't remember the details, but you fix all the railways and we'll give you a 3-month lease on the railways. So we need a 300-year lease if we're going to do that. But the important thing is there's now a negotiation about privatizing the railway. Margaret Thatcher did that. To me, who watches this from closely for 20 years, it's amazing that we've moved this far. It's very hard when you're in, as you are, in the economy every day, facing your salesman comes to you with your numbers at the end of the week, and it can be tough. To also have the ability to pull back and try and see a bigger global picture. But we're fortunate. It's another thing I think that's good about where we are at the moment. It mustn't be taken for granted that an authoritarian government wouldn't necessarily allow you to produce your own electricity on the roof of your house. These things, we take it for granted that this happens. And I think where private operators push, towns, whatever the case, to say we're going to do more on our own, you're going to find less and less resistance from the state. And as a country, we've moved very far down that road already, quietly. You know, in '94, there were 120,000 policemen and 120,000 private security people. And today there are, I think, 150,000 policemen, 550,000 private security people, including a lot of the original policemen who now run the businesses that do this. And the definition of a state, one of the definitions, the best one, is a monopoly on the use of force in society. And the South Africa's government has given that up to the private sector. I think it's useful if you have a sort of positive approach to South Africa. It's not going to happen again that we're going to have a government in the union buildings that does the stuff that typically governments should do. It's unrealistic, that. But it's not going to get too much in the way of people and communities who start to do that stuff for themselves. We're not going to be a typical Western corner of Europe in the veldt with a Swedish government that runs them. And if that's hard for you, which it is for many people, then you know, you've got options. You can go to Canada, Australia, or somewhere with New Zealand, where the government will tell you what you can and can't do. The people that remain here start to do it for themselves. And you guys here in Natal, I mean, the others watching, but you're such an amazing example of that. Because that you're here at all is amazing. I mean, my American clients, you know, they can't imagine that you could have survived your little what battle of. It's impossible to think. So I think get out of the headspace that someone's coming from Pretoria to fix it. Realize the state's going to give you a lot of room to do that yourself, and there's strong upsides to that. And if you want to make it here, or in any emerging market that's volatile, that's the mindset that works, and means that the outlook is hard, but it's not dire.
Hi, Frans. Thanks for the talk. It's very interesting. In 2018, I was at a similar talk with you prior to the 2019 elections, and you presented several scenarios, and one of those was an unlikely scenario that people would semigrate to coastal estates and hamlets, whatever. Subsequently, that's happened, but obviously for different reasons. What's your view on that going forward, and the impact of kind of the inland metros and the effect on the coastal urban ones?
I think in a low growth South Africa, the inland metros will be depleted and crumble. They'll still be there, and people will live there and have businesses there. And skills and capital will flow to the coastline, will line the coast. And you have, in a sense, almost enclave formation, where in the same way that I don't think it helps to think the government's going to come and solve your problem in your community. It'd be nice, unlikely. To think of the country as a unitary thing, a block, becomes a mistake, because some of those enclaves, the Western Cape in a sense becomes a big enclave, and the Cape Metropole a small one within that, and Stellenbosch a very small one within that. Some of those enclaves, a friend of ours calls them citadels, will be the highest growth emerging markets in the world. Have amazing standards of living. Long ago I did a job for an American pharmaceutical firm whose American directors thought this is going to become a banana republic and they should leave. And the local directors obviously didn't want to leave because they live here. And so we had to prepare a presentation for the Americans who were coming to visit. And we said to them, the South African coastline, especially around the Cape, will become like Florida. Will be older people who have dollarized themselves to an extent, needing knees and hips replaced. And they said, this is wonderful. It's a wonderful prospect. We're staying right here. So I think that will continue to happen in a very high growth South Africa, which we won't be in the next decade, but it could be in the 2030s. Just the question of space and demand and cost will mean that there could be a resuscitation of our central urban communities. Yeah. Where do you see the unemployment rate? It stays where it is, about 30%. The growth rate isn't strong enough to bring the unemployment rate down. The only era in the last 30 years where the unemployment rate fell was between 2004, let's say 2001 and about 2008. And the economy averaged 4% and then 5% growth. And in those 8 years, the unemployment rate fell from 30% to 20%. Any growth rate short of 4, more likely 5, cannot move the dial on the unemployment rate. So it remains what it is. Yeah.
Frans, thanks. Great presentation. So we estimate that the interest rates will drop the next year, which should allow more serviceability of debt and customers wanting to buy cars. At the same time, the load shedding scenario, in my opinion, if we don't correct that sooner, customers may take that extra cash and kit out their houses in terms of solar panels and inverters, etc. So the government's got a plan in terms of how they're going to improve the load shedding in the next year. A lot of it seems to hinge on improving the coal infrastructure and getting those power stations fueled up. What, in your opinion, are some of the impediments to that plan rolling out as projected? Because that's critical that load shedding improves for customers to be comfortable with the power situation and to invest their money in cars and houses as opposed to solar plants at home. Thank you.
The chief impediment is green ideology imported from Europe and America that exists even in our business community, and judges that the global climate is in such a catastrophic state that it would be better for South Africa to produce less electricity and maintain its 30% unemployment rate, because that is the choice you make. There's not another choice. It's better that than that South Africa goes back to coal. And that's the chief impediment. And if it doesn't happen, it will be because our European and American trade partners, as they've done already, are threatening our exports over the carbon content of the electricity that's used to produce them. And I think the South African government should take a very firm line to say to the Europeans and Americans and the local business community, it's morally unacceptable, whatever your view on climate is, to say that South Africa cannot in the next 10 years stabilize its economy and its politics from an energy perspective by refurbishing the coal plants and using the grid it already has. That's all we're asking for. Once we're back on a stable keel, we will have the time to adopt the nuclear and green technologies that might be more efficient forms of energy production. And I am told that that's the last word. So thank you very much. I've enjoyed this. Thanks for getting me out, and I hope you have a very successful year ahead.
Let's give France another round. That was an awesome presentation. France, you really enlightened us, and I think a lot of us are going to look at things totally differently from here on. As you said in the beginning, a lot of us have been looking at the mainstream media, and we haven't been looking at this data. And I think this is something that we need to share far more broadly with the rest of the South African community, certainly the motor industry, and we thank you very much for such an enlightening presentation.
Thank you very much.
Before we go on, Renee, could you put up the Q code again? For everybody here, we're going to run a couple of polls as well during the course of the day. We also, for the questions, people online can send their questions in through the Q code, so you just got to scan it, and then you can use your cell phones to answer it. So please, that's the Q code. There's the number you need to enter in, log in, and then you've been logged in. So for the first poll, before I introduce our next speaker, who do you think South Africa will meet in the final of this year's World Cup? Okay, it's bouncing around. I'm going to stop it right now, and it looks like the consensus is that it's going to be France. So that's from within here and outside. And before I continue, also on the stage, you'll see we've got a lucky draw gift that's going to be done right at the end. To qualify, you need to be here, or you need to be online at the time we do the draw. So if you want to duck early, you ain't going to get a chance for this. And if you're online and your name gets pulled and you're not on there, we know you're not on there, you ain't getting it neither. Okay. So it's as simple as that. So please stick around. It's a lovely memorabilia for the World Rugby, and it just fits in with our theme. It fits in with what's happening around the world at the moment, our World Cup. And all I can say is, I hate that checkered jersey. Both. Okay, let us introduce, the gentleman was up here. He introduced France, but none of you knew who he was, actually. He was just a very big, tall guy. But I'm sure if you've been anywhere in South Africa and you see Mark Andrews, you know who Mark Andrews was. It's amazing, his career. He played 165 games for the Sharks. He also captained them. He's always come across as a very humble person. Although, I don't know, when I see him going into a scrum, I don't think that's very humble. In his 20 years of his rugby career, I don't think many of you realize he received 94 Springbok caps and he played in 77 tests. That body of yours must have taken a lot of pain. He then, Watchko, retired in 2004, but we got to go even further back. We got to go back to 1995, that World Cup. I don't think any of us will forget it. And Christie made one very, very clever move. He told Mark, you're not going to be a lock anymore. You're going to be an eighth man. And that just absolutely made New Zealand dumbfounded. They said, how can you put such a big guy in at number 8? But it worked. It was a strategy that worked, and Mark played a very, very big role in South Africa winning the World Cup then. The other thing a lot of you don't know is that Mark now is a very successful businessman, and one of the key elements of his family thing is family. He's a very big family man. He's got 4 children, and he was telling us out there he's busy writing his own book, which he's going to give to each of his children about his career. I don't know, can I become a kid and get one of those books? I'd love to read it. But let's see, Mark's going to come and speak to us about the World Cup, about his experiences, what they've learnt, and putting those back into business practice. But he's also, we're going to put him on the spot. We're going to ask him to predict what the Boks are going to do. Welcome, Mark.
Jerry, thank you very much. That was very flattering. Geez, I'd like to meet this like you talk about. He sounds like an asshole. I don't know if you guys are all right to go for another half an hour, if you need a toilet break or a cell phone break. So I'll make it quick. Now that the light-hearted stuff is over from France, we'll talk about the serious stuff now, which is the Rugby World Cup. What France didn't mention is how important, how important us doing well in the Rugby World Cup lifts the mood of this country. I think those of you all look old enough to have been around for the 95. Most of you, some of you may not have been. But I was lucky enough to be part of that 1995 World Cup. And I'll never forget what it felt like to be a South African during those weeks after the 95 World Cup. We need some good news as South Africans, we really do. France talking about Eskom fixing itself in the next year or so. I truly hope they do. But what will fix this country's mood a lot quicker is if we win this World Cup in France. So I'm gonna speak about a couple of, on a serious note. He was very serious, and that rightly so. He's talking about our country and our future. So I'm gonna lighten the mood a little bit. Tell you just some stories about my past playing rugby, playing the World Cups, some people I played with, and then we'll get into a little bit of my analysis on what our chances are in the World Cup. I just quickly, Frans, when I spoke to him earlier, was speaking about leaders and about how South Africa is lacking leadership. He kept on talking about the think tank of the ANC, and then he kept on joking that they don't actually think that much. And then I related just a story that the first time I met Nelson Mandela. And I want to take you guys back to 1995, the week before we played the opening game against Australia. Remember, democracy was happening in 94, 95. We were about to play against Australia, who were the prior world champions. There wasn't a huge amount of hope. We'd only been back into world rugby for 2 years. We backed ourselves, but I don't think we didn't know how good we really were playing against the best. We trained at a place called Silvermine in Cape Town, and it was a military base, all secured. So we arrived for a train session. It was our third train session there, and we were told to bring a tracksuit and some change of clothes after train session because we were going to have some guests, which was a bit strange. Anyway, I'll never forget, 22-year-old Lighty, you arrive on the bus, the train session, geez, and there's snipers on the roof of our train facility. There's a sniper lying there. There were guys with dogs, there were fire engines, and I thought, Jesus, these guys are taking our security pretty seriously for this World Cup. This is hardcore. Anyway, after train session, we got inside, we had shower changed, and there's a hall probably a little bit bigger than this, about 1.5 times the size of this. And we were told to line up, stand on the door. We were all standing. We had no idea who we were meeting. The next thing we heard a helicopter, this huge chopper above us. And then we kind of, hey, this must be someone pretty important if he's arriving in a helicopter. So we still had no idea. Then we got told to line up from the door all the way in, and being the lighting on the side, I was standing right at the end with the baggage master and the physio and the doctor and all the rest of it, and all like the senior Springbok players were right at the door. The next thing, the door opened, and in walked Morne du Plessis with Nelson Mandela. And there was like this little nervous buzz, and he walked down the line. Obviously, I was right at the end now, looking, waiting my turn and seeing what he was doing. And what struck me straight away is that every player he stopped and he spoke to, for those 5-10 seconds, Nelson Mandela was speaking to that player. He wasn't shaking hands, moving to the next guy. He was speaking to that player. Asked him the name. Some of the guys he knew the names. Some of the guys he didn't. Shook hands. Got to me right at the end. I come from the Transkei, Eastern Cape. I grew up in a little town pretty close to where Nelson Mandela grew up. So I greeted him in Xhosa. He asked me where I learned his Xhosa from. I said, I come from Mikoa in the Eastern Cape. He said, you must come visit me for a braai one day. We'll braai some meat together. She was quite in what. And then he went on and he met the rest of the guys. And then I'll never forget, Morne du Plessis said to him, Mr. Mandela, would you like to have some tea and coffee? And the hotel had provided in the corner coffee station with tea, coffee, biscuits. And this is where I realized you're someone special. Turned around and he said, I haven't finished greeting everybody yet. I'm thinking, geez, but he's met everybody. And he turned around and he started walking to the back of this hall. And at the back of the hall were two Xhosa ladies who had obviously come in earlier, told to sweep the hall. And they must have heard or something that Miss Mandela, and they had snuck back in and were standing in the far corner with their brooms, just watching. And he turned, and we all he was like the Pied Piper. We all like walking around, not sure what the hell was going on here. Walked to the back of the hall, and the Inkosa, he greeted each one of them. Asked them where they were from, the Transkei they came from, and then he thanked them for looking after the Amaboka Boka. He then turned around and he walked to the table for his coffee. And again, he was just this incredible man. He stopped, and Mona was trying to say, "Do you want coffee, tea, or biscuit?" And there were two colored ladies and a Xhosa lady again, and he spoke to each one of them. Asked them where they're from, where their families, and then he said to them again, "Thank you for looking after our Springboks." That has never ever left me. I've been lucky enough to meet presidents of New Zealand and Australia and Ireland, and not one of them had the dignity and the largeness of a human being that Nelson Mandela had. So for me, that set the tone for the 1995 World Cup for us. I then want to go onto a lighter side of this. Frans was speaking obviously about South Africa and giving his opinions and insights. I was in 1993, I was 21 years old, played for the Sharks the first time, the Springboks, went on tours to New Zealand for felt like years at a time. It's not a great country. You joked about not a great place. But anyway, I just want to share some of the advice that I was given. All of this is genuine. The advice that I was given as a 21-year-old playing with some real legends of the game. The first bit of advice I want to count is what Tommy Loubser, who was the 132-kilogram Western Province tight head and Springbok prop. This is the advice that he gave me in seriousness. He said he lives his life by two simple rules. The first, remember he weighed 132 kgs. The first, he said, I never sleep with a woman who weighs more than me. So my second rule is that I never ever sleep with a woman who has more hair on her back than me. He then said in all seriousness, but you think I'm joking? He said, this is a very crucial bit of advice I'm giving you. He said, because I have never ever felt like a loser in life by breaking those two life rules. That's the Tommy Loubser. I don't know, he set the bar incredibly low, but anyway, he lived according to it. My next pearl of rugby wisdom and dating wisdom came from one of our own Natal boys, Johnny Allen, the Springbok and Sharks hooker. We were on tour, Springbok tour in 1994 in New Zealand, and after games we used to get vouchers because we were amateurs. We used to get vouchers to get beers, to go to a nightclub, whatever. So I'd been a youngster, all the tight forwards, we were all sitting in this bar, and a pack of vouchers came out, and I got told to go and get the beers for the senior guys. So as I lied to you off, I went to the bar counter, getting little cards to get our free beers, and there was a young girl there, obviously started chatting, how's it, everything, very pretty young girl. Then had to excuse myself, got the beers, went down, sat down, and gathered this is the beers. And Johnny Allen said to me, my boy, I want to give you some advice. While you playing for the Sharks and the Springboks, never forget this. So I saw you talking to the young girl there. So, yeah? He goes, you are a tight forward. So I was like, yeah? He said, well, us tight forwards, we see ourselves like a Pride Alliance. He said, that young girl, you need to see her as like a gazelle. She's a young Springbok or a young Impala or something. And only the fleet-footed killers approach the fleet-footed antelope. The guys like the backs, the wings, the fullbacks, James Small, Andre Joubert, US van der Westhuizen. That's their prey. I was like, okay, Johnny. He says, what we do, we sit and we drink. We're like lions at a waterhole. We have beers and we drink and we look. And we watch, as the evening progresses, we watch these fleet-footed killers like the Jouberts take out the young gazelles. And we just sit. And he said, and we drink. And we sit and we watch. And he said, but remember, at about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, when you see that old hippo limping out the door, that's when we make our kill. He said, that is who we go for. And never ever try and take a young-footed killer because you'll embarrass the pride. That's a genuine advice I got from Johnny Allen. Lots of dating advice to a youngster. The next advice came from Dickie Muir, who was the Sharks and the Springbok centre. Now, Dickie wasn't renowned for being the fittest and the most athletic background player. And this is gospel. He said to me, pre-season, first training session, wear the tightest pair of rugby shorts you own. Tightest. Like, why would I do that? He said, and then every couple of days, you put on a bigger pair of shorts at training, and then a bigger pair of shorts. So after about a week or 10 days, he said the fitness trainers and coaches will think you've lost so much weight that they will stop pushing you hard and they'll back off you. Thank you, Mia. Dr. Uli Schmidt, who played for the Bulls and played for the Springboks. We were on tour in '94 in the UK, and we actually played at the opening of Murrayfield. And we were about to meet Princess Anne. I think she was the patron saint of Scottish rugby, the brand new Murrayfield. And obviously a lot of nerves. We hadn't played them for a few years, and get in the change room and start getting undressed to start change to warm up. And there's Dr. Uli Schmidt, lying in his tracksuit with his feet up against the wall, reading the match day program. I was looking at this, and anyway, carrying getting changed, got in my training, into my warm-up gear, then we all get called to go and do the warm-up. Dr. Uli Schmidt hasn't moved. Here's the hooker. At the end of the go, right before we were to go on, and next time I see him sit down, puts his match gear on, rolls his shoulders a bit, kicks his legs out, call us on, we're on the field. He plays a test match. And I asked him afterwards, I said, Doc, how come you didn't warm up? Like, you didn't warm up. He said, warming up wastes energy. He said, I'm also a hunter. He said, all the years I've been hunting, whenever, for example, hunting impala and I miss, that impala takes off at 100 miles an hour. I've never seen one stop with a hammy. He said, you don't need a warm-up. Contrary to, and he was a doctor. I don't know how many muscles I tore after that, but I'm never warming up. Some other advice, Andrew Blakeway. I don't know if you Natal guys remember Andrew Blakeway. Andrew Blakeway looked like a lab rat dipped in peroxide. Not the best looking guy, white skin. But anyway, Andrew Blakeway said to me, as a jumper, never forget this in Curry Cup, all games televised. In the line-outs, I could jump 2, 4, or 7. He said, always go and stand next to their ugliest jumper. Because then you'll look good looking on TV. That's what he does. In your story, we were playing against Northern Transvaal, up at Loftus. And in the line-outs, there was a guy called Philip Skitter, who was just the uglier version of Andrew Blakeway. In the line-out, Blakeway supported me in the line-out, and next thing, Philip Skitter's staying there, and Blake starts going, Philip, Philip. Skitter eventually turns around, looks at him, like, you don't talk, it's middle of the game. Blakeway says to him, Philip, do me a favor, please, but never retire before me. As long as you're playing, I'm the second ugliest prick in South African rugby. All genuine advice. The next advice came from, and I'm not sure you guys remember, is a guy called Keith Andrews, played Western Province prop and Springboks. He was my cousin. My dear cousin looks a bit like a vertically challenged Shrek. Not the best looking human being in the world. And this is probably the best advice he gave me. He said to me, listen, Mark, you're a tight forward. Rugby isn't allow you to meet some really good looking women. Take advantage of it. The first beautiful woman that shows interest in you, marry her. Because as your career advances, you're only going to get uglier. James Dalton, while playing England, this is genuine. He said, only brides should wear all white, not rugby teams. He said, but there's a positive to that, because the English white rugby jersey shows blood beautifully. So as you can imagine, for my career, with that advice I got, it's been pretty hard to stay normal. Wayne Fyvie, also a Sharks boy, played in the Springboks with him. We did a function similar to this, and then we had a Q&A afterwards. And someone asked him and said, Fives, what has rugby given you in life? Expecting a philosophical reply. Fives thought about it for a bit. Then he said, if it wasn't for rugby, I would have had to have spent at least 6 months in prison to meet some of the people I met in life. And if you think back to some of the guys who've played rugby in this country, you'll understand that. Gary mentioned earlier on a serious part. Gary mentioned earlier about the 1995 World Cup when I got, and you were way too kind, that I got moved from lock to 8th man. I'd like to share the story, and it's pretty much probably what we all go through in life. And it's sometimes I've had to remind myself what I managed to get through by going through it. And it's very much in business, the same kind of thing. When you have a curveball thrown at you, and you don't know how to deal with it, you don't, and that's the time to rely on your colleagues, to rely on your family, and to back yourself. So I want to paint the scene. played against Western Samoa in the quarterfinal at Ellis Park. We beat them comfortably. We get given 3 days to go home. The first time the World Cup, we come back and we fly back up to Joburg, even though the semi-final wasn't played back here in Durban. I think we played Samoa on a Thursday or Friday, but we got the weekend, we came back. And Joel Stransky and I were roommates, and we're in the room, Sunnyside Hotel in Johannesburg. Sunday evening, Joel and I lie in the room. Next thing, the room phone rings. People still use them in those days. And Joel picked the phone up, and he was like, hello, yes, Morne. Yeah, Morne, Mark's here. Okay, I'll tell him. Put the phone down. Now, I didn't explain why that is such a terrifying phone call. If you were in the Springbok rugby side, in a test match that just happened, and the management called you to the manager's room on a Sunday, that means they're going to break the news to you that you'd been dropped. Okay? And then they announce it to the training team on the Monday. But they always, out of decency, tell you you're no longer on the side. So now I played against the Samoa, and I always knew that Kitch Christie wanted big forwards. So he wanted Kobus Visser and Hannes Strydom. And Hannes Strydom was on the side because I was the lock, so it was myself and Kobus. The problem is, Kobus could only just jump over Sunday Times laid flat. Now, we were about to play against the French, who had 4 phenomenal line-out jumpers. We had me. The Iceman was Charlie, who could jump over the Sunday Tribune barely. So we weren't the most athletic jumping side. So I get called down. I remember thinking, Jesus, World Cup, semi-final. My folks are coming up from the farm. My boots are all coming. They all arranged tickets, and I'm going to have to phone them and tell them that I've been dropped. I'm standing outside Mone's room, composing myself, knock on the door. Come in, door opens, and there's Kitch Christie sitting, and Morne and Gysie Pino. And Kitch Christie wasn't a man to mince his words, and he said to me, he called me Marky in a diminutive, I'm not sure why. He said, Marky, can you play flank? I said, no, Coach, I can't play flank. He said, are you sure? I thought I'd remember if I played flank somewhere. I've never played flank, Coach. He said, it's a pity. He said, you can go. Jesus, I remember, walked out, closed the door, walked down the passage, got back into the room, and as I walked up, Joel was swung his legs with bed, and he went, hey, he said, rooms. How'd it go? I said, geez, Joel, I don't know. He said, well, are you in the side or you out there? I said, I don't know. He said, what do you mean you don't know? I said, well, Coach asked me if I can play flank. He said, what did you say? I said, no. And he went, ooh. So, Joel, what do you mean, ooh? He said, Tony, you know he wants to play Kobus and Hannes. And he's offered you flank, and you said no. Like, oh, crap. They're not this smart. Anyway, sitting there, 15 minutes, next thing the phone rings again. I look at it like it's a puff at a line there. I don't want to touch it. Joel answers it. Yes, Morne, Mark's here. I'll send him to see you. Now you can imagine. Said I can't play flank. I know Kitch wants to play Kobus and Hannes locks. I walk down that passage. Now I honestly think it's done. Knock on the door. First try and compose myself. Not very manly to cry in front of the coach if he tells you not on the side. Door opens. Come in. Coach says to me, Marky, can you play 8th man? Now I played 8th man in under 15 at Selborne College. I said, yeah, Coach, I can play 8th man. He goes, really? You play 8th man? I said, yeah, Coach, I can play 8th man. He taps Morne DPP on the leg. He says, Morne, I told you. You were a South African legend 8th man. Mark's built like you. He plays like you. Mark, you'll be fantastic. I said, Coach, I'm great. Not a bad luck either, eh? Thanks, you can go. Walk out again. Get down the passage, open the door. Now Joel is walking around, pacing in the room. I walk in, he goes, and? So I said, Joel, I don't know. He said, what do you mean you don't know? Are you in or out? I said, I know, Joel. He said, what happened? I said, well, Coach asked me if I can play 8th man. He said, what did you say? I said, yes. He said, can you? I said, no. He said, why did you say yes? I said, Joel, you already told me he's not playing me lock. I said no to flank. There's nowhere else I can play. So I said, yes. He goes, oh, Jesus, okay. Next morning, they announced the Springbok side at breakfast, just in a room like this. And they go through the side. I'll never forget it. Sitting there, Osterrand, Chris Rousseau, Barley Swart, Kobus Visser, Hannes Strydom. I think, Jesus, I've been dropped. Ruben Kruger, Francois Pienaar, Mark Andrews. It was like the team had just worked out who the team kleptomaniac was, because everybody turned around and looked at me. They were more shocked than I was. Anyway, after that, I walked up to the coach, Kitch, and my nerve broke. And I went up to him, and Kitch and Morne were standing there, and guys were shaking my hand like, I'm not really sure if I was contagious or something, when they were like saying, well done on the side. Everybody was shocked. I was more shocked. I went to the coach, but just by the reaction of the players, and I honestly just shat myself. I thought, listen, I can't put my own aspirations ahead of what the team needs. I went to Kitch and I said, Coach, stand on the whiteboard like this. I said, Coach, so I can chat to you. He said, congratulations, Mark, well done. I said, Coach, I did say I last played under 15, did I? I'm not sure if I told you that. He went, so, okay. Guys, hold on 1 second. Can Francois, Mornay, and Charles please come here? We're just going to go through the moves on the whiteboard with Mark for half an hour. Guys, we'll leave for training half an hour later. That's the confidence that Kitch Christie showed in me. That's what Francois Pinard and the rest of the guys showed in me. I went to play, and I eventually said, okay, we trained that week. Thank God it rained like you can't believe in Durban, so I wasn't exposed on the dry field. I managed to win a few of the French lineouts. We won our lineouts because we had a second jumper and a stratum. History will tell you we won the game just. World Cup final, the deal with coach and I was that I'd only play for the semi against the French. Come the final, calls me and he says, listen, we're not talking about this, you're playing 8th man in the final. Funny enough, you spoke about the All Blacks. I did an interview with Ian Jones, the lock who I played against for years later. And I said to him, Jonesy, when you heard that I was playing 8th man, he said, we thought it was a ploy. There was no ways you were going to do it on a dry field. We were so shocked when you ran on as 8th man, we couldn't believe it. I said, well, I couldn't believe it either. Anyway, that I had to adapt to change. And I just want to share one thing as that's all stayed in my mind. Driving to that training field on the Thursday before the final. I'll never forget seeing on a billboard on those telephone poles where the newspapers put their little headlines. Will Andrews cost us the World Cup final? 22 years old. And I see that thing saying the doubt. But what got me through was my teammates. And it was one of probably the most terrifying 2 weeks I've spent in my whole life. But it was something that I think has given me a whole lot of belief in myself for the rest of my life. Knowing that I'm capable of more things than I thought I was. But anyway, I wasn't great in the final, Gary, just to confirm that. I just snuck through. I don't know if I watched it, I'm not that sure. Anyway, let's just quickly talk about the World Cup on the serious side. Scotland. Who thought we played well? Who thought we played badly? Average. Guys, we did brilliantly. The reason why, you're now looking at what we did against the All Blacks and we gave them a smack which is fantastic, which is honestly fantastic. But going into a World Cup and you're playing against the Scots, understand the Scots are playing against Ireland and the Springboks. They don't win one of those two games. They aren't. Their World Cup ends in the pool stages. They played that game as though their life depended on it. We played that game knowing that we have to get through that game to get to the quarters, semis and finals. Put in perspective of how big that game was for Scotland and how big it was for us, but it wasn't the biggest. Scotland are playing their World Cup semi-final and final against us and playing against Ireland. The good thing for me, we won, which we had to do obviously in the pool game. The next thing is our scrums got put under pressure. And ladies, I hope I won't get too technical on the rugby side, but our scrums got put under pressure, which was fantastic because we've scrummed everybody for the last year. That breeds confidence and overconfidence. The fact that we came back on in the second half and then turned them over twice just shows what a fright that we got. Okay, so that's a great thing. You don't want to go steamroll them, go into the next game thinking that you're better than you actually are. The next thing was Monty Libbok at fly half was phenomenal as a ball player. His kick-in got exposed. He missed 4 kicks. That's also fantastic because that, makes our management go, okay, against All Blacks he hit 5 out of 5. Yeah, he missed 4. You can't win a semi-final, even a quarter-final and a final, missing 4 kicks at poles. You can't do that. You're not going to win. So what do? They have to come with a plan B. Faf, we're on a 95 World Cup group, on a WhatsApp group, and one of the players was at the game, and he said in the warm-up, he saw Faf kick in, kicked 11 kicks at goals in the warm-up, and hit 10 out of 11. Marnie only got about 60% of the ones kicked at goal. So I think they're going to sit back and go, okay, guys, if I was captain, if I was involved in that side, I'd say, guys, Marnie, Cheslin, Faf, if those are the guys playing, in the warm-up, kick. During the week, you guys are kicking. Whoever's on song in the warm-up takes the kicks. The other option is to only give Marnie the kicks which are close, which you know he'll get, because that builds confidence. And then the wide-out ones, give to Cheslin, give to Faf. But we have to get an 80% kick rate if we want to win this World Cup. That's just the way. If you look at what happened with England, kicking the drop kicks, they were man down, they still won the game comfortably. Look at the French. The French have got a kicker. I think he's missed 3 kicks in the last 4 test matches. So our kick inside, but it's exposed us that we have to have a kicking plan. It can't just be Marnie by himself, and then bringing Faf on at the end when he's just missed too many kicks. The other points are, okay, quarterfinal. I saw the stats said, would we play the All Blacks? Well, we can't play the All Blacks because we're playing the All Blacks. If we win our pool, we'll play them in the quarterfinals because they've already lost to France. So would I prefer to play the All Blacks or France? Who would you prefer to play? Why?
They're not really at the top of their game, right?
Correct.
We lost to France and South Africa with very good scores.
Correct. So rugby is about confidence. I played against the All Blacks in '99. We played for third and fourth place when we beat them. The All Blacks aren't used to losing. They're a confident team that just keep on building confidence through winning. When they start losing, they lose their confidence as quickly as they do when they build it. They are not used to losing. Their country's writing them off. They are not in a good place mentally. And I'd rather go against, and I think Russie will do the exact same thing. So I think Russie would have, if they had won, Russie would have had a hard thing to do. Do we then lose against Ireland to make sure we play against All Blacks? Because you don't want to play against France in their World Cup with they're on song in the quarterfinal. You rather want to play them in the final. And the reason why is that I played against the French, I think 13, 14 test matches. The French can get emotional. And emotion clouds decision making. And it tires you. I always knew, playing against the Irish or the French, and watch this on next week when we play against the Irish. If the Irish start crying in the anthem, we've got 40 minutes of hell, and then we'll beat them. Because emotion, I've played games where the tears have been pouring down like it's a funeral. Because they get so worked up and so emotional that in the next 30, 40 minutes, they have no energy left. Because they've consumed it all just on emotion. The French were also like that. So I'm hoping that if we get to the final and we play against France, that moment is so big for them and they get themselves so worked up that they're going to play themselves out of the game emotionally. So for me, quarterfinals, we're probably going to play against the All Blacks if we beat the Irish. And I think we'll scrape through that one. The All Blacks psychologically, how do you come back from a game that you got absolutely dominated? The other thing that the Scotland game showed me is that our bomb squad is phenomenal when they come on together. We had Marks coming off in the middle of the game. Etzebeth came off. So our bomb squad, there were only 2 guys who came on, not the 4 guys that they wanted to come on. So that's another thing that the manager are going to have to try and work out. Because when we put that bomb squad in the second half, you can imagine, guys, you play a test match, and I've played lots of them. You give everything. By half time, you're all equally shattered. Okay? Have a break, you come back on again, you start playing. And then next thing, the guys you're playing against bring on 5 huge bastards as big as the Oaks who just left the field, and they're all fresh. Now you've got to play against these bricks. And they're all ready to go. That's a hell of a thing, guys. I think the RB are going to change the rules at the end of this World Cup because it just suits South Africa too much. No other team in this World Cup have got 2 packs as powerful as we've got. I'm going to get just on the technical side quickly about rugby so you guys understand if you're watching the next few games. We've got a thing called a rush defense, which means our backline rushes from the outside in. The reason for that is to try and stop them going wide, and we want to bring their backs back towards our brute forwards, kind of as I can put it. Because our forwards want to get their hands on you and hurt you. So our whole game plan is to close them off from the outside, to rush defense on the outside, make their backline come back in to our forwards, and we control the game. Because our forwards dominate the impact, they dominate the tackle when they carry. But that whole game plan relies on our pack dominating the set phases and the breakdown. And I'm going to explain a technical thing now that I haven't heard one pundit or one expert talk about. Ian McIntosh was one of the the brilliant minds of rugby, the late Ian McIntosh. And when the Sharks were so successful in the 90s, there was one main thing that we played on. Ian Mac wanted us on attack to be on the front foot. The front foot literally meant on the front part of your foot. So when you want to take the ball, whoever was carrying that ball and receiving the ball was on the front foot. On defense, you wanted the defenders, again, to be on their front foot. Because when you're on the front foot, you're able to move forward a lot quicker. If you're on the back foot, in other words, you have a line out, they have a line out and they start mauling a bit, and your defenders, your backline's doing this, because you have to stay at the 10 meters, going backwards. And then all of a sudden, the attack gets launched, you're now on your back foot. You've lost that half a second, and that's the difference between making an offensive tackle and a defensive tackle. It's all about momentum. And that momentum is reliant on that little technical thing of playing on the front foot or the back foot. The Springboks, if you look at the All Blacks, why were the All Blacks so useless? We dominated every line out they got the ball, their jumper would catch it, would be almost moving backwards, given to the scrummy, who's taken a step backwards, our whole rush defense is coming across and closing them down. You can't play and beat the Springboks if your pack is being dominated. We need our pack to dominate every single game we play. If our pack dominates, we will win. If it's a 50-50, if the guys you're playing against get a stationary scrum, a stationary line out, if on the impact, the rucks and the mauls, if it's a stationary ball, our rush defense will get beaten. And then we're going to be in trouble. The Scots beat us once on the outside. Wayne Libbok made a great tackle. So that's a huge risk to us. I'm sure Russie and the coaching staff have a backup for that. But it's going to depend on our pack and our bomb squad, keeping them under pressure. Every game we play is going to be like the Scots. Because every side we play against, now you've got to front up against the Springboks. Tell you a story. I was playing for the British Barbarians, end of my career. Anton Oliver was the ex-All Black hooker. And we were sitting down having dinner, and I didn't normally talk to the opposing players after test matches, because I find it hard to, I always had a theory. If I met Hitler, for example, and Hitler wanted to be nice, he could put in a great side, and I probably wouldn't think he's done a bad act, okay, even though he was a monster. So I had the same thing when I played against the All Blacks, Australia, England, wherever. I didn't want to talk to the guys after a game, because I wanted to hate them. So when I played against them, there wasn't one iota of me thinking he's a nice guy. I just thought he was a prick. It allowed me to be more physical, more brutal, whatever. Anton Oliver at the table said to me, we were talking, he even said to me, geez, Andrews, you're not such a bad oak. Didn't use the word oak. He said, you're not so bad, mate. And I was like, I think, well, nice. What do you mean? He said, Jesus, we hated you. We hated playing against you. You're like a psycho. He said, in fact, all you Springboks are like psychos. He says, you know what we've worked out? In New Zealand, we play the game of rugby because we're passionate about rugby. You people in South Africa play rugby because you're angry. The whole world knows that. You play against us, expect to get hurt. And we're one of the only sides that can do that, hurt and get hurt week in, week out, because that's just our psyche and how we play. So if the guys who play against us, like the Scots, they come on through everything, but they can do it one game. That's just not the way they play the rugby. So for us, if we can dominate and keep our pack hurting people and get our backs on the front foot, we will win this World Cup. I think we'll play against France in the final. Anyway, I'm not sure if there's time for questions. If you like questions, I think our time is done. But to wrap it up, guys, you want some questions? I don't know if there are any questions, but if there are, we've got 1 or 2 minutes to take some quickly. Hopefully I've covered everything. Are there any questions? No, everybody needs to go and check their cell phones. Guys, thank you very much. I wish you the best of luck for the rest of the year. I hope everything that France says about the economy and the country moving up next year comes true. I look forward to buying a new car next year. Have a great day. Cheers.
Mark, thank you very much. I'm glad that you believe the Blocks are going to win, and we won't hold you to it. But if they don't bring the cup back, we know where you stay. Guys, we've had quite a long session, so I'm going to give you a 3-minute quick break. Stretch your legs, grab something outside, do what you need to do, but please, not longer than 3 minutes back, please. And the people online, the same to you. You've got 3 minutes to go make yourself a quick cup of coffee and be back for the next 2 presentations. Thank you. Are we back? Okay, welcome back. You're such good people. You were listening to Andrew. You've got to work as a team. You're back on time. Well done. We're going to have another poll. Renee's going to put it up. And then after that, I'll introduce our next speaker. Is the poll coming? Okay. Where do you think your overall business performance will finish at the end of this month? Somebody answered that right up front. Come on, keep going. I'm only going to give it a little while. Quite interesting. Everybody must have been listening to France. They're a little bit more positive. So we're looking at up on last month and flat. So people are sort of saying 50-50. It's just moved a little bit in the other direction. So there is more a positive attitude towards what's happening with your business finishing better. Our next speaker is Kobus Smit. I'm going to read it because it's very technical. As the principal product owner at Brighthouse Automotive, Kobus's background encompasses innovation, analytics, automation, and software product development. In his current role, he is dedicated to crafting cutting-edge mobile, data-related products tailored for the dynamic retail automotive market. I'm still waiting for him to sell the 10 cars that I asked him last night, but I'm sure he's going to give us the answer now. So welcome, Kobus.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone. And yeah, that summary is a lot better than the one I submitted to you guys. So thank you. It's almost aspirational for me. All right. So today I'd like to talk about performance, but really I think an angle to performance that I think we don't always look at. And I think if I look at what France is talking about, what Mark was talking about, there's some really interesting elements and parallels that I can draw to the insights that they actually gave us. We really want to make sure that we've got performance in every position. Essentially, if we had to look at this as in a team analogy. And if we look at the dealership, we look at the group, we want to ensure that we've got performance in every area. Not just in isolation, but really looking at it holistically, to be able to make sure that we can actually get that performance in the right way so that each team member, as part of this whole, actually brings it together so that we can actually win the game. So that's an important part. So one of the answers and angles to actually understanding performance relates to data. And that's an important thing. And I think a lot of people have actually spoken about data previously, and Onoda and the idea is really at the end of the day that there are a lot of promises made around what data could do, but often they end up being empty promises. And I'd want to explore a little bit of that today as well and seeing how can we practically look at getting data to work for us in a way that's applicable and applicable in our industry. So I think this year is actually known, I suppose, for those who are a little bit more towards the information technology side, essentially referred to as the year of the prompt. And what that typically refers to is, for those of you just maybe I can't see online, but maybe just by a show of hands, for those of you who've at least heard of or used things like GPT chat, as an example. All right, so, and what is that? It's essentially a mechanism for you to ultimately ask any type of question you want in any specific way. And this system is trained on essentially a large portion of the internet, and it can just bring back information in a very cohesive way, back in a format that answers a question. Imagine training something like that on all the data that you work on a daily basis. Not just things from your DMS, but if we think about macroeconomic and socioeconomic type of information, elements that France referred to, also having insights into the actual team members, as Mark actually alluded to, being specific areas in your dealership, like services, parts, etc. That could actually give you incredible insight if you could just ask a little question to say, well, how can I sell more cars this month? Or how can I sell more cars today? And having some form of a system that actually responds to that, giving you a very adequate answer in terms of aspects that you need to address to be able to do that, but in such a way that you can actually go and action them. I mean, in a way, if you could do something like that or have a technology that actually provides that kind of information and feedback to you essentially instantly, that would be probably what I would call winning, right? I mean, that's a great way of actually winning the game and being able to ultimately perform. You know, the challenge, however, is that winning isn't necessarily everything. Yes, it is important, but I think, you know, Mark also alluded to it. I think you might have your opinions around how the Bok game went with the Scots. I believe that, you know, generally it was an okay game, but we all recognize that there were missed opportunities. We all recognize that there were potentially even, dare I say it, and I do so with respect given what the pressure is on the field, is that there might even be novice handling errors that actually creeped in. And in the same way, that's actually what we're doing to our data today when it comes to retail automotive, is that we are not handling it in the appropriate way. So how is your business using data to actually measure and drive performance? I love the rugby analogy that we can use here. You'll see a little bit of a blotted out screen in the back. You might not be able to always read it, but it gives you a good sense as to what type of elements are tracked as part of a game. And incredible things that you can actually learn from a specific team. And with enough data over time, you can kind of come up with formulaic methods to ultimately predict certain characteristics of a game when two specific teams will be able to meet. And what a great type of insight wouldn't that have for us, and benefit with that have for us to be able to actually apply that in the market today. But there's a challenge. You know, we need to be able to achieve this performance in some way. And you guys know that old adage of you can't really manage anything that you can't measure. I remember a little joke. One of the product executives at SAB Miller years and years ago, when they were still called that, they mentioned that, you know, the way they manage their business is to say that everything, they measure everything that moves and everything that doesn't, they paint yellow. That's pretty much how they run their business. And it's an interesting thing because, you know, we do track a lot of things as part of our business, but there are challenges. We're not really leveraging data, I believe, in the way that it could be leveraged. I mean, we're not making the most of it. Let's look at some issues that actually crop up when it comes to looking at just how we practically handle data today. So we have a lot of manual report development that's actually happening. Yes, you might have some reports in your DMS that need to be built, but they, you know, customizing them could take a while. It often could be considered tedious. We've got expensive data tools. I mean, to be quite honest, I mean, data tools right now are very, very expensive to implement. It's not just about licensing a tool, it's about actually getting it to work in your environment, getting to work around your environment, and the data that you're actually working with to formulate specific type of insights. It's an expensive and often a very or time-consuming process. We need to look at strengthening our data governance. A lot of us are used to using spreadsheets when it comes to tracking specific things in the dealership. Spreadsheets are vulnerable. People actually can manipulate those things in specific ways to ultimately make sure that that final report kind of looks okay. And, you know, in that way, we're not really necessarily reflecting information from the source of whence it came. And that's also a very important piece. We're not really leveraging the full potential of our data. We've got such a lot of data that we're actually sitting on, but we don't really look at it over time, nor can we really sort of gain insights about tomorrow necessarily by just looking at history. So there's a lot of things that need to happen to this data to be accurate and provide a bit of a futuristic view as well. We can't just use trends as an example. So there's limitations there. We can't always action data. All right, so we can see we've got a downtrend, we've got an uptrend, we've got some shifts and changes, but so what? What do we do about that? You know, it's not necessarily actionable either. And it can often be unstructured, you know, in document format. Could be images, could be anything that we're actually dealing with on a daily basis, but we can't really do anything with that information to get us that edge. So going forward, we need to look at things that allow us to do rapid report configuration. So we really need to make sure we can quickly build these reports. We want to make sure that something is affordable for our industry. because it's not affordable at the moment. Just looking at some of the sort of high and mighty third-party analytics tools that are out there, we need to be able to automate a lot of these things so that you can actually have something on your desk or whenever you need it, wherever you need it. So I think that's going to be quite key. We need to definitely make sure that we enhance the quality, which I'll cover right now. We need to be able to generate new insights. I think that's something that we find with some of the new bringing together of data can actually provide insights never seen before. We often have questions of our data that we try and answer in a very sort of methodical and systematic way. But with some of the new ways in which data can be integrated and looking at things like artificial intelligence, you can pick up new patterns of information and get answers that you haven't seen before because certain factors just simply have not been considered. Think about, I'd like to refer back to France's view on, looking at, specific consumer confidence, buying patterns related to, economic aspects such as interest rates, as an example. I mean, those are external factors. Yes, we consider that, we understand that, but there are external pieces of data that we need to kind of bring into the fold to give us a lot more insight in terms of our own industry and really sort of bringing that to the field. All right. So just imagine for a second, what if we could do some of the following things? I mean, if we get timely alerts on important business events, things that might actually affect profitability, do that in real time. I mean, that would be really great to be able to know that, or even proactively where possible. How can I identify the best deal or best opportunity? How can I get a quick and reliable calculation on the best trade-in right away, so that I can actually optimize value for the customer, but also optimize profitability on my side. So things that can actually happen quite quickly instead of sometimes taking a little bit longer and isn't necessarily optimal. Accurately matching specific deals based on market profiles, understanding our customers a lot better than we do right now. And I think that's also going to be quite a key thing that we'd like to be able to do. Determining incentives, I think, which isn't necessarily just focused on specific divisions or departments or areas in the dealership, but incentives that could potentially have an impact on the dealership as a whole. So instead of just looking at it in a sort of very siloed based way. Optimizing the balance between having great service levels, but also a lot of cost efficiency as well, and optimize cost efficiency so we can again optimize our margins there. Constructing more accurate sales forecasts. I mean, that would be a wonderful way to also look ahead by considering more than just the data that we have at hand to be able to kind of look ahead. And then also determining a return on marketing drives. I mean, we all do some form of marketing and we run campaigns, but what are the real returns over time with respect to that? Can we track it? Can we tangibly kind of say what type of impact that actually has on us? And and over what period of time would that actually have an effect? So it's really being able to kind of understand our data to the next level. So if we look at, I think it's just a little bit of a layered cake view, and I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of the layers of data that we really need to start thinking about when it comes to actually putting together some form of cohesive strategy for measuring and executing improved performance in the retail automotive space. We all actually have these layers in some way, shape or form at our disposal. But there are really important and critical, even endemic type of problems in each one of these layers that actually need to be addressed practically in order to get the value out of data that analysts and architects and innovators have tried to promise this industry for probably more than a decade. We have to get back to certain basics. I mean, if I think about a rugby team, we really require consistency. You heard Mark say, having an 80% kick rate is pivotal, for us to really win the cup. And in this context, we need to make sure that each and every game, irrespective of our strategy, that we are able to execute it exactly as it needs to be, and being able to be consistent game, from one game to the next. So in this context, that's really what I'm trying to sort of give you a sense of here. Is if we look at something like data sources, yes, we've got DMS systems. DMS systems at the moment can have in excess of 5,000 different integration points. That's a lot of integration points, looking at different types of data. But we also have other type of sources, external sources. Could be little spreadsheets, could be documents, could be all sorts of things. And I'm not alluding to big data at all. I'm rather just talking about the fact that we've got these little piece of data islands sitting there, out there, and we're not bringing them together. And hence, what's important here is being able to kind of integrate that information. A key element that we also completely neglect, which is sort of akin to mishandling the ball during the game, is the fact that, we don't really look after the quality of our data. We expect that if we put something in the system will fix it, which isn't always the case. And we try and make sure that, at least we massage the data as much as possible to get it to a state where it's at least believable. But is it truly fact? Is it reflected in the source? How can you really trust that at the end of the day? So that's one of the key points, is actually making sure that we've got some form of quality control over the actual data that we have in our systems across these different sources. Then we've got reporting. Yeah, we've got spreadsheets, and we've got possibly tedious type of reports on our system that we actually need to view, and it takes a long time to kind of customize them. And that doesn't really bring through the value that you want to get from your data. So we need a way to kind of do that a lot quicker. Then we've got this wonderful word called business intelligence that never sort of delivered, I think, the promises that it originally had. But what is great about it, though, is it allows us to actually understand a little bit more about what happened in the past, trying to diagnose that a little bit and be able to kind of give us some sense of things that we could do in the future, even though it doesn't really look forward. It looks actually historically. It's historically focused. So and then above that layer is really where we're kind of right now in the industry, is actually looking at advanced analytics and artificial intelligence to be able to take a great mass of body of data, be able to kind of learn from that, extract the patterns, etc., to allow us to not only predict, but also to prescribe specific type of actions that we can take in the dealership on a daily basis to optimize our performance. And I think that's some of the key elements that are really now starting to actually transpire. But as with many things, if the house is built on foundations that are crumbling or not necessarily in the state that they need to be, then your analytics will also be flawed, and hence you can't really leverage that to the point where you can visualize the specific performance profile of your business and be able to kind of optimize the different areas inside the dealership itself. So looking at things like marketing, compliance related areas, sales, service, parts, etc. So all of those things actually are built on a very important foundation, and hence why we need to address those. So if we look at some of what the management consulting companies are portraying as potential trends, looking at it at a global scale, and I'm careful of doing this because South Africa is also a unique market. So looking at things globally is sometimes a little bit averaged out and doesn't necessarily apply. But there are some interesting highlights and things that we can look at to get a sense as to where sort of the Western market is moving, Europe, etc., to give us a sense of what's happening. So a lot of the work that we're doing today sits in a diagnostic space. Diagnostic just says, well, what is happening right now? Gives us a sense of, well, okay, this is what has happened, and we're trying to analyze that as much as possible. Where things are getting really interesting is with predictive type of information, where we kind of say, well, okay, well, what is going to happen tomorrow, as an example? And we got a lot of that during Francis' presentation. But going even further is actually looking at prescriptive, to be able to kind of say, well, almost being able to run scenarios and saying, if this happens, then that, but also being able to kind of say, creating decisive type of actions that can actually be generated from your data to say, do this now, do this more, so that I can sell more. And having very, very specific type of information contextually formatted for you to be able to go and execute on when you need it. And I think that's really where a lot of the industry is actually moving towards right now. But unfortunately, we are mostly stuck in the diagnostic space today. It's really, we don't even really fully leverage, all the historic data that we have necessarily. And we kind of just look at, well, what's my daily operating control? How am I kind of doing against target, today? But we can't really sort of look ahead very far because of a lot of various factors which we cannot see in the data right now because our data is also limited. It's also got certain gaps that we don't address. So we need to kind of look at filling some of those gaps as well, which I'll talk about a little bit in a little bit. I'm just giving you a sense as to what's interesting is that a lot of market opportunity modeling actually coming forward. So instead of trying to just take your historic data, what the guys are now trying to look at is actually trying to build models. They're trying to build models that give you a sense, and similar to France's discussion as well, which I'll refer to quite numerous times, is that we need to look at very specific factors that ultimately influence the way in which the behavior is shaped in our market, economically, etc. We need to understand what some of those factors are and build them into a comprehensive model so that we can more effectively predict. Not just use our historic data to actually predict forward. Yes, there's a sense and a level of seasonality in some of our data. I mean, we can't get ourselves there. But the problem is that that isn't enough to really tell us what is going to happen in the future because of a lot of events that are actually transpiring, specifically on an economic level. All right, but where the guys are moving is trying to build models that can help predict the future. So that'll get better and better as we learn more about data and more volumes of data. Offer personalization, being able to kind of zone in on very specific features. I had a very interesting conversation last night as well, saying that, what is in a feature? What is safety to someone? I mean, is it really such an important factor in a car? I mean, does safety mean I can handle a crash at 40 kilometers an hour? Or does safety mean that I don't have to walk so that I don't get attacked? So certain little things like that, which is very, very fundamental to the way in which we actually look at this. Used vehicle pricing tools, being able to kind of estimate that very, very quickly based on understanding historic pricing, but also market demand, etc. Multiple factors actually that need to be looked at. Customer journey optimization, being able to understand whether a young person is buying, they kind of go and do research online, they engage with you by doing a booking online, versus another demographic actually coming in physically into the dealership itself to be able to start conducting business. Understanding how we can actually engage in first point and how do we actually handle the entire process of communication with that specific customer from cradle to grave. So we really need to make sure that we actually understand those specific modes of engagement, because that ultimately also adds to some form of delightful experience that will make them come back and up some loyalty, if you will, as well, regarding this broader process. And it goes on. There's a lot of aspects here, and I've covered a very small portion of some of these major types of analytics. But today we struggle. We can't really find a lot of pertinent examples, even in our industry, that really focuses on very strong predictive and prescriptive analytics. And I believe that's something that we do need to address. But we do need to make sure that the foundations are actually correct. So imagine doing more and actually winning, but winning more as well. So making sure we don't miss the penalties. We don't have any potential turnovers or mishandling at any stage. It's really being able to kind of pick that up. So imagine, elements, such as visibility on online reviews. Simple example, being able to say, well, all right, I understand this demographic, I understand who's actually triggering this specific type of review. I understand the market. I understand the comment. I can even trace it back to a potential service or part, as part of an event in the business. I mean, those things are possible, but we do need to make sure that we've got data to actually support that. So that's quite a key thing. Being able to dynamically adjust daily targets. We typically just do, flat division as an example to be able to get to some form of a budget figure. How can we dynamically, change that based on potential seasonality effects or what is actually happening in the market for this particular month or even week? Those are very important pieces so we can actually drive the team in the right direction at any given time. Cheaper customer acquisition. How many leads are we getting that are duplicates? How many leads are we really getting that are truly well qualified? That's been a long debate, being able to do that, but an important question nonetheless. The more we know about customers, the more we can actually enhance the way in which we actually qualify those leads as well. I'm going to continue to skip over a couple of things. I think compliance is going to be a very important aspect as well. Looking at FIC compliance, BOPIA, we've got a lot of specific areas that also need to be covered. Understanding what our state is, what is our state of risk, what is our level of compliance that we actually have as an organization. And a lot of this is indicated by data. And I think we need to kind of focus on that. We need to be able to draw insights from links between our customers, between vehicles, sales events, service events, parts that they order. Everything around the ecosystem needs to be linked together, and they are not necessarily linked together. We often look at things quite in quite an isolated way. All right, and then also providing an integrated dealership insight, into that can even go back to the OEMs. And if we are essentially the arms, of the OEMs to a large degree, the custodians of the customer relationship, and we need to make sure, that we can optimize this relationship between ourselves, the dealerships, and the groups, and the OEMs as well. And by leveraging data in a much better way, we can provide much better insight as well, back to them. Getting better products, better service, and better options going forward. So, how do we get there? I think that's an important one because it often becomes a highly theoretical exercise to actually try and project, what kind of path you need to take as a business to do this. I will say probably a practical answer is that it's again a team analogy that's important here, is that I don't believe this is something that can just be done, you can do on your own. I believe that there is a team that needs to work together to be able to kind of address these vital layers of the data stack, if you wanted to call it that, to make sure that you can actually benefit from that. So one of the things that we've been looking at is this idea of an industry-specific platform. If we think about this industry, it is mature, it has withstood the test of time through many an economic cycle, and it's largely remained generally unchanged, for quite a while, and many years. Even decades, dare I say so. And in this context, we can learn a lot from the industry itself. And we need some form of a mechanism that ultimately drives towards creating a platform, an automotive data platform that can ultimately benefit all. And this platform needs to provide very specific type of services that can ultimately benefit, the market, and specifically the dealership market in that context. We need to look at elements such as marketing and sales intelligence components. So something that can tell me really what are the returns that I'm actually have on my marketing and my engagement with my clients. We need to be able to have predictive and prescriptive type of analytics built in specifically for automotive that draws upon other elements as well to give us, broader insight than just what's inside our industry. We need to be able to kind of look at compliance-related aspects, a very, very vital component to the broader data question and how we actually implement them. We need to look at governed reporting. We need to be able to slice and dice our reports very quickly so that we can actually test the way in which our data assumptions are correct or incorrect. Doing a report quickly in a flash is very important as part of discussions and decisions. And those are not things that happen easily. When last did you ask for a report or a change to a report, and how long did it take to do that? The answer is generally not a good one. And we need to be able to make sure that we can do that quicker. But we can do that if we understand the industry, which we do. We've got data, and we've got experience in this space. So we need to kind of draw on that data to make it more easily accessible and quicker to configure to actually get to the benefit that we really want to get to. And then last but not least, I think probably 2 points here is that we need to look at ensuring that we can get the quality of our data right. Now, one of the areas that we are looking at addressing right now is actually looking at data quality benchmarking, being able to find some form of a mechanism that can run across your systems to be able to kind of tell you, listen, you've got a general score of X% in terms of data quality. And this relates to duplication of data, quality of data in terms of, let's say, address information, anything to that effect that might be inaccurate in your system, to be able to give you kind of a benchmark across multiple dealerships as an example, so that you can go and address those and actively fix it so that the reporting and the analytics that builds on top of that gets better. So in a nutshell, I'm actually referring to a platform that's developed for this industry that will be affordable, flexible, specialized for us, that we kind of need to build. And I'll get to just that piece in a little bit. So we need to be able to kind of look at each one of those areas, but very, very vital right now is this little piece that I mentioned here at point number 2, is making sure that the data is integrated. Because that's one of our biggest challenges right now. It's almost one of the first steps when it comes to actually making sure that your data journey works. And that means that, all these little silos, all these little pieces of information sitting out there actually need to be put together in some way so that we can ultimately draw much richer insight from it. And that's probably one of the most important steps that we can do so that we can get the benefits of all the rest. All right. So I'm not going to go through all the details with respect to actions and benefits, but I think what's quite key here is that for each one of these systems or components of this platform will have specific benefits that can ultimately lead to actions. Being able to kind of say, we don't pay for the same lead twice. As an example, we've got better qualified leads, which means our conversion rates are much higher. So we can actually track some of those specific aspects. Pursuing high potential leads, that's really what we want to do as an action, that actually comes out of the process. Custom and personalized messaging as part of our engagement process with our customers on a daily basis, so that we build loyalty, we build rapport, specific type of actions that actually can come from that. And improved order cycle, to actually maximize profit as well. Making sure you've got the correct lead times with respect to, vehicle stock, parts, etc. So this is really my closing slide, is that it's great to actually have a platform and a concept that we can actually work together, we can kind of build. But I believe that each individual part, even looking at the NADA partnership as an example, each partner as an example brings to the party a potentially complementary type of data set. If we look at what each party is actually doing, it's often complementary and not competitive in that space. But each individual party does not have access in an easy way to the other portion of complementary data. So in some way, we need to sort of look at a way of getting that data into a broader platform so that it is integrated. And to do that, maybe I leave you with this question and saying, well, isn't there a way that we could potentially look at working together? Join hands, look at complementary data sets, bringing them together in a way that can actually benefit all dealerships in South Africa by giving a specific strategic advantage, but by ensuring that we've got all these components actually mapped together. Because in isolation, we can't see. We don't have the scope, we don't have the vision to actually look outside. But if we bring everything together in some way, there might be a really great mechanism for us, lying for us in the future to be able to kind of, get data accessibly, affordably into the dealership's hands, and really making sure that we can cut out all the blind spots, eliminate all the mishandling, and actually seize those opportunities that we typically miss on a daily basis because we're not really leveraging our data in the way that we should to gain that level of performance that we require. All right, so I'm going to sort of stop there, and I think maybe just open up to questions in this space. It's a very broad topic, but I believe data should be at the core of what it is that we actually do as a business today. And I think in that context, we need to we're going to focus on that a lot more going forward. It's going to be unavoidable to us at this stage. Yeah, question.
Quivers, I'm going to put my own man on the spot here. Speaking on behalf of all the dealerships and my KZN clients and nationwide, my question is, how could the automotive retail get to a more mature stage in managing their data?
Okay, so I believe that there are pockets of excellence in South Africa with respect to data management and growth there, so there are some leaders in this space. But I believe that we do need to look at maybe our partnership view as well. I'll use Westbank as an example from a financial services perspective. That I also come from a banking background, and I believe that financial services are probably some of the most advanced organizations from an architectural and technological implementation perspective compared to other industries in the country. They are very forward thinking in terms of ensuring that they can meet regulation. They've got very, very scalable type of approaches, and because of the scale, there's a lot of learning that we can actually gain from them, benefits that we can gain from them by understanding how it is that they are addressing data in their business that can actually benefit the automotive retail industry. So my answer to you is really that I believe there's something to that little spider diagram that I showed you guys, and saying that we need to actually work together a little bit more, learn from other industries, look a little bit to the outside where it matters, so that we can actually bring some of that expertise, some of that learning into our own fold, and actually fix that data stack to get the ultimate benefits that we need to get. So yeah, that's a very good question. So sometimes, what we did was in this example was actually presuppose the fact that certain incentives would be across a dealership. At the moment, we don't really have examples of these because we don't have enough data to necessarily tell us exactly what those incentives might be. What this really relates to, it asks the question around maybe something more towards a customer metric that we need to actually look at the end of the day. Not just looking at sales, not just looking at potential service performance or quality of service or just general satisfaction, but maybe specific type of metrics that relate to the customer itself, or even the customer profile, that we could ultimately break up into specific metrics that actually cut across. So it might be a higher level metric that kind of rolls up in some way, but is broken down, that actually affects each and every part of the dealership itself. So it might just not necessarily just be one single one, but a rolled up type of metric or index that we can kind of come up with to be able to kind of get that sort of end-to-end measurement of performance across each and every part of the dealership. So that's an interesting question as well. I'm trying to sort of relate integration of data to fraud. I suppose fraud really is always going to be a risk when it comes to bringing more and more pieces of data together, because what we are doing is we are ultimately expanding and enhancing the scope of the data that we actually have access to, which also means that we need to make sure that we add particular predictive measures for that data. So I would believe that in adding more things, we are adding more risk as well. So I don't believe that it's adding more things or more scope to data is going to curb the fraud risk. It may, in certain instances, depending on what level of fraud we're referring to, if we have more information on a customer, for argument's sake, I believe that it could actually help curb fraud by understanding a little bit more about the profile of the specific person or a particular segment. So there's a benefit to that. By knowing more, we can actually curb fraud more. But the downside is saying, if I have access to more information, I have more to protect, and that also can be exposed and potentially manipulated in a fraudulent way, or to at least to promote fraud. So as with anything, data needs to be quality, it needs to be secure. So I think that's an unavoidable element that we need to look at. All right, okay, so that's it from my side. Quite a broad topic, but I wanted to thank you. I think there's a lot more discussion that needs to come from this, but I'd like to leave you just with us actually joining forces, holding hands, and actually looking at bringing our data together in such a way so that we can expose the blind sides, and be able to kind of leverage more insights together going forward, for the benefit of all dealerships as well in South Africa. Thanks.
Gribbers, thank you very much. I think you've highlighted an important element, that a lot of people are sitting with data. A lot of people sometimes don't know what to do with it, but there's a lot of suppliers to the industry that are sitting with various elements of data, and maybe down the line, yes, but we would have to look at the competition issues and those type of things. So thank you very much. Before we go to our next speaker and our final speaker for the day, we got one more poll. What do you perceive will be the impact of auto on your business? anybody knows what auto is. Just letting it run for a couple of seconds. That is very interesting. We got some dealers out there that don't know what auto is. Therefore, I think our next presentation is going to be just on point, because if there's dealers out there that really don't know what auto is, and there's other dealers that are saying that it's business as usual, I think we've got quite a lot of ostriches out there at the moment, because this is coming down the line. And our next speaker is going to deal with some compliance matters. Cobus spoke about compliance. It's a major portion of your business. A lot of you sort of see it as an element in your business, but you don't really focus on it. But more and more, there's elements of legal issues, compliance issues that are taking up a lot more time in your business. And if you don't understand it, it's going to come back and bite you at some stage. So I'm happy to introduce Brandon Cohen. Brandon comes from the Motors Group. He's legal compliance within the Motors Group. We've had the fortunate privilege of having Brandon on the NADI exec for 15 years, working behind the scenes, giving us a lot of guidance. A lot of you have actually had the privilege of the information that Brandon's assisted us with, that we've shared with our dealers out there. But Brandon recently, with the departure of Mark Domisay as our chair, we went through an election process, and the internal feeling was that there's no better person with the knowledge and broad experience on the NADA exec than for Brandon to be the national chair of NADA. So Brandon took over on the 1st of July, and we're really excited. Some of the plans that he's already been discussing with me behind is going to take NADA to another level, and I'm really looking forward to it. So Brandon, over to you.
Thank you. I think, firstly, thanks for being here. Thanks for giving your time. I think we have a kind of a perverse way of doing things to put the legal guy at the end. You've sat through here for 3 hours, and now you've got to listen to legal. So before you throw stuff at me, it was much easier in Teams, because you could just move away. Here you can actually physically throw something. And I'm going to give a lot of stuff. But it's important, and in keeping with this kind of Rugby World Cup theme, we saw a stat or a poll earlier, and it said that you think this month is probably going to be flat. Now, that's a hell of a lot of work to just get to what we did last month. The worst thing you can do is throw all that profit away by having a fine or a regulatory inspection or something like that. So what we see here, and what I'm going to try and do, and I don't have a presentation because those just can get boring when it comes to legal, is just talk you through protecting your profit. That's really what it's about. So you can take what I give you, apply it to your own business, and you can really go, what's the point where compliance can overtake profit? Then we don't do that. But let's protect what we've done. Let's protect that money we've made. You might give away first gross, make it up on second gross, but if you lose it in a fine, you haven't made it up anywhere. So that's what I'm going to do. Now, we ran that R2 poll so that I could just gauge, and that's the nice thing about not having a presentation, because then I can adapt. And R2, for the 17% that reflected they didn't know, is the Administrative Adjudication of Road Traffic Offences Act. But basically what we know that as is the demerit thing that's coming. Okay, so what is it? How did it get there? And why does this apply to you? And what do you do in your dealership? And we'll try and give you some hints and things like that to try and help out. So this is 20 years in the making. The whole idea with R2 originally was to actually free up the court process, because right now when you've got a traffic infringement, it's a legal court process. You've got to go to a magistrate, things like that, if you just don't pay the admission of guilt fine. And the admission of guilt fine gives you a criminal record and things like that, which you do have to disclose, by the way, on visa applications to go to other countries, if you knew that or not. But what they decided was, there's so many of these infringements, let's take that out of the courts, because our courts, even 20 years ago, how long does it take you to get to court? Put it into a new tribunal system, put it into an administrative system, create an administrative agency, the Road Traffic Infringement Agency, create another agency, because we love creating employment this way, through the Road Traffic Management Corporation, and run it like that. Obviously, we know they've tried to make this work and it didn't. And then in 2021, what happens is it's green light. Let's go. R2 is going to start. It's going to come in 3 phases. And phase 3 will be the introduction of the demerit system. That's the thing that most people think about, care about. The points on your license. Now your license will be suspended. What do we do? How do we do that? But we're going, and phase 1 rolled out. And then Outer took this whole thing to court, and the High Court declared that R2 was unconstitutional and put the brakes on it. Problem is, anytime you make a constitutional ruling, you've got to go to Constitutional Court to get that confirmed. That happened. They went in October, and you'll know on the 20th of July this year, the Constitutional Court said, well, no, there's nothing wrong with it. It's fully constitutional. Green light. Let's go. On the 23rd, just 3 days later, our Minister of Transport said, great, it's a green light. We're going for it. And R2 will take effect 1 July 2024. Now, that's very close. So, what does that mean for us? Well, what has to happen up front? Every one of the 67 municipalities in this country, the main municipality, the metros, have to link into the RTMC system so that all of their systems talk to each other. This is really important when we get into demerits. Then what has to happen is the new regulations have to be published. Now, that sounds quite a simple one, but you go through a NEDAC process, which we believe is finished. Then it has to go out for public comment. That's a 30-day process. Then once the public comment is finished, you've got to go around to, because this is big legislation, to every one of the 9 provinces and take feedback. Then you've got to collate all of that, and then you've got to report to the Standing Committee. Then the Standing Committee has to report to Parliament. Then Parliament has to give it to a vote, and then 2 houses of Parliament have to vote, and then the President has to sign that into law by the 1st of July. It's an election year, some weird and wonderful, strange things do happen. And we do get... So what you'll probably see is all things going as per normal is on 15th of December, they'll put it out for comment so that there's no one around to comment, and they'll say, look, no one cares. And we'll bring it through. That's how most of our legislation works. But what does this mean for us in the dealers? It's quite a big element for us. Because we think, okay, but what's points on a license mean? Who cares? Well, think about this. Let's go for test drives. You can't allow the person to test drive a car whose license is legally suspended. But you can't see that by looking at their card. So there's your first problem. Second problem, you can't finance a car to a driver who's got a suspended license. The banks will not allow it. They've already given us that. They can't. They can't finance suspended licenses. So now there's another issue. Cars on loan. You need to know what's going on because that's your vehicle. Now here's the big thing. Once you get to 12 points, your license is suspended. Now if we had electronic licenses, it would be easy. I couldn't give it to you because it's been suspended and it's been removed. But we do not yet have electronic licenses. They are coming, we believe, in 5 years. But you're going to have a mechanism, talk to data, that allows you to ping something to tell you as the dealer what the person's license status is. If you're in car rental, this is even bigger, but we're dealers and we're talking dealer stuff. But it's a very key element because you need to know the status of that person. You need to know the status of your staff. Are they allowed to legally be driving your dealer vehicles? Because if their license is suspended, they're not allowed on the road. And you'll only be able to do this by pinging a system. Now, to ping a system, that's the Road Traffic Management Corporation, and you would have seen in the news, one of the big used car guys, they launched the first kind of pilot. It doesn't have the demerits in it because all the municipalities aren't linked, and that's where we get to the linking of all the municipalities. So this is quite a big thing for your dealer. You're going to have to think about, number one, how do I know if the person has demerits? The next thing you have to think about and have a system in place, manual or electronic, is how do I redirect the fine to make sure that my car does not receive a demerit. And what I mean by this, if you follow the demerits anywhere in the world, Australia, wherever they have them, the person gets the demerit. So I do something wrong, I get a point on my license. I do a lot of things wrong, I lose my license. Fair, great. We decided that the rest of the world is a bit stupid and we're going to come up with a brand new, unique thing that this will be the only country in the world to do. we're also going to put the fine on the car. So if I can't find the human, I'm finding the vehicle. And if the vehicle gets 12 points, you park the car because it's not legally allowed to be on the road. There comes a big thing of knowing who was in that car, who got the fine, and through the R27 system, how you're going to redirect. And on the redirect, are you going to redirect it to the correct entity in the correct way within the correct amount of time? Otherwise, the points will go to your vehicle, and if you've got loan cars and things like that, you're going to have a bit of a problem. So these are the kind of realistic things that we have till the 1st of July to think about. They're not the end of the world stuff. There are guys working on it. The Road Traffic Management Corporation, for example, is going to be releasing, and we'll see it in about a week, 2 options. If you are able to meet their minimum transaction threshold, either in your dealer or your group, you'll be allowed to apply to them to have direct AP access. So you'll have an AP integration into their system, and as long as your system, and you need your system developers or your system partners, they can then ping and pull and redirect and do a whole bunch of cool stuff. But that's only allowed for we believe, subject to the minister, 3,000 transactions per year. So you got to register, you got to sell 3,000 cars a year in your business. I'm so cool, I'm getting it from the front and back. So that's something to think. If you're under that threshold, or you are at the threshold, but you just do not have the funds to build all these systems and have all these platforms, you will be able to apply and go through a registration process and actually log on to a website manually and be able to do that. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of time, but there are the solutions to do it. What you need to do is think about one, how, and then what you've got to do for your own staff from an employment law and a labor law perspective. How are you going to treat your staff? You're going to have to think between now and July and then the 30 days to implement in any company. Who needs to drive a vehicle to be employed in my business? Where is that an absolute operational requirement? You can't just make blanket rules because labor law doesn't work like that. That's my history is labor law. So if a person is office bound all day and everything and they lose their driver's license, it doesn't change anything. As long as they can get themselves to work, they can Uber there, spend the day in the dealer and Uber home, it doesn't affect your business. But who absolutely needs a driver's? And you've got to tailor and update your labor policies, your disciplinary policies, your vehicle policies where you give people cars to drive in the dealership, your demo stock. Those things have to all be in place. And you're not allowed to, in terms of labor law, just impose that on the 1st of July, so you've got to bring it back 30 days, give the 30-day window, and consult where necessary. So that's what R2 means to a dealer. Don't think about just the demerits. Think about how that works with your own staff, with your drivers, with the guys fetching parts, delivering parts. I mean, this can become a big thing if it's not managed. But I love the measure it, manage it thing because my previous CEO, that was what we were all taught from day one. If you can measure it, you can manage it. And if you do these things, you can measure it and you can manage it. If you put your head in the sand, there's a sustainability issue going forward. And it's such an unnecessary sustainability issue because these things you can work out very simply. The next big kind of thing to keep in mind and to work out is POPI. It came up in the previous presentation, and POPI is quite a big thing. And what we're seeing quite a lot of is that POPI, Protection of Personal Information Act, that was a big project in 2021 when the law came in, the project's over, we move on with business, nothing really happened. Please don't see it that way, because the biggest thing with POPI is it's such a cultural shift. It is changing everything you do. And culture shifts take a lot of time to implement. Think about this in your own business. How many of you really, you don't have to put your hand up, don't worry. Really, every time you send an email, select the correct sensitivity setting of that email? Operational, private, confidential, public. Every email. It has to become so normalized because that's the easiest part of POPI. Donald Trump right now, one of the multiple things he's being indicted for, is the taking of top secret documents. You've seen that, Mar-a-Lago, got all those things. What did they do? They have document classifications on them. People don't think about, why do I have to say it all the time? What does it mean? If you classify the document, there's a whole lot of legal things that come with that. Those documents that Donald Trump took said top secret. They're not allowed to be removed from the White House. They have to be given to the National Archives. That's the rule. And we have to have that same thing. So do you have a document classification system? You can get them online. The rest of the world has done data protection for years and years and years. You don't have to create your own. You just find from the EU. But you've got to have it. The next thing with Poppy, simple thing, clean desks. Clean desks look very cool. They are very professional. But how many dealerships do you walk around and see stuff on salesman's desk? If they're sitting there and working on it, great. But people like to print stuff. They like it tangible. Hold it, do it. You don't need it. I haven't had a printer for years in my office, and I haven't missed it. But you've got to teach yourself to not print everything and then do it. Because if you print it, where do you store it? Where do you put it? How do you destroy it? Who destroys it? Now, there's this big thing, and this is where I get a little bit iffy with consultants. You know, on the one hand, you want to be compliant, but on the other hand, you do not want to break the bank and kill everything that's good about sharing things. So, give you a real practical example. We went to Australia a couple of years ago. We're lucky in the group I work for. We've got businesses everywhere, and we get to see best practices. So we went out to Australia, and we went to go visit 2 banks. Now, the one bank, British-owned, had taken data protection to the nines. We're talking about when you got to the place, you handed your phone in, locked it away, you got your key, you kept your key. You had your visitor's card, you had someone with you at all times. Every screen had those things on them that if you look at it from any angle, you can't see. Anytime you walk near an open plan, they even move their screens away from you. Next, and I shit you not, next to every single desk, there were slots with built-in shredders. So that if they print, they have their own printer, their own shredder, they print, retread. This is the level. It was clinical. There was nothing. That business doesn't exist anymore. It was Capital. It was owned by Lloyd's of London. They went too far. They killed every aspect of being able to actually talk to each other and do business. You can't do that. Yes, they'll never get a fine, but if you don't exist, what's the point? Then we had the other guys. An awesome bank, and they do still exist, and they're growing, and they've bought out 2 other banks, and besides current legal issues, they're doing really well, not related to data. But what they did is they took a practical approach. Data protection is important, the law is important, we're Australian, and Australians like to follow the rules. Okay, but what did they do? They had certain things. They had the open plans, they had cool stuff on the people's desks, kids' drawings, whatever. They had music playing, they had a nice environment. But all of them instinctively, simplest thing, and we try and bring this into every dealership. Every guy has one drawer, which is an empty drawer, but it locks. And the simplest thing, you can work with as much paper as you like. When you stand up, throw it in the drawer, lock the drawer. You don't have to order it and put it nicely. Just chuck it in, and when you get there, throw it, put it back on your desk. Simple little things that didn't cost any money. They comply with the law. They keep business flowing. And that's really what compliance is about. You know, but you've got to think about this. Now, here's something that has come up very recently with Poppy and data protection, and it's something that does affect every single dealership. Most dealers have little WhatsApp groups where all the salesmen, maybe the sales manager, maybe even the DP is involved on the WhatsApp group. And customer stuff comes in, usually through an email, and then we put the customer stuff on the WhatsApp group, and we say, hey, Brandon Cohen's buying this car. Okay, cool, Joe, you could go do it. Here's his stuff. Here's his ID. What you're doing is you're processing the personal information of a third party without that third party's permission to share it with all these people that third party doesn't know, because to process information, you either have to have a legal right to do so, or you have to have consent. It's one or the other. The second thing you're doing is if you're not using WhatsApp for Business, for example, it's sitting on everybody's device. So now I made an inquiry, but my ID and everything is now sitting on like 30 salespeople's devices. 29 of them are not going to last more than, 6 months turnover in the motor industry. And they're walking away with all that customer data to another dealership, the modern version of the Black Book. Now, how illegal is this, and how far is the regulator willing to go? The regulator right now has put out a statement that they are working out the level of the fine or penalty to find the SAPS. All the SAPs did was a bunch of detectives had a WhatsApp group, and they shared wanted people's data. Here's the guy's photo, this is their name, they want it for this, if you see them, just let us know. Sounds cool, crime fighting, it's SAPs. It's illegal, that person hasn't been convicted. They don't give permission, and there's no legal justification to have that data sitting on their WhatsApp group and sitting on their phones. She's going to find them. She found her own boss. To go to the veracity of this regulator, she fined her boss 10 million rand, the Minister of Justice, because they didn't have the minimum firewalls, antivirus, simple things like that after 3 different warnings. Her own boss. So they're a very active regulator. If you lose even one laptop that's not BitLocker encrypted or any form of encrypted, you have to, by law, fill in a form and alert the regulator. One laptop, one cell phone, anything that's a business asset that's not fully encrypted. It's law. You do it, you're fine. You don't do it, big problem. And the final thing on the Poppy stuff is the regulator put out a note earlier in the year, it had to be done by the end of June, where every single business in South Africa had to report back, and it was 10 questions, yes or no, and a number, and it was how many data losses have you had, how many incidents have you had, how many PIA applications, PIA is Access to Information Act, and things like that. Simple stuff, yes, no, didn't need to provide evidence. But it was a legal requirement in terms of the Act to do that, and if you did not do that, you face up to 10 million rand fine. How many of us didn't even know about that? Don't think that because you haven't heard it in the media that this is not a huge piece of law that is so vital to what we do. And it's so difficult because it's a cultural shift. The Australians have done it for 20 years. We ask our own dealers, because they get up, the salesman gets up, he's only been there a day or two, chucks it in the drawer, locks it away, walks away. Because we've also seen it in all our dealerships. You're like, why are you doing that? No, I don't know, everyone does it, we do it. You get up, throw the stuff in there. It's not about, oh, I'm worried about data protection. It's just habit. All the time, habit becomes natural. You don't have to worry about compliance. And that's what Poppy is. It's so vital to what we do. It doesn't cost any money to get it right until you get into the big data stuff and your firewalls and all the cool stuff. But the general stuff you're going to get fined for is the daily stuff that costs no money. It does cost time, and it costs management effort to remind and remind and remind until it becomes habit forming and normal, that you don't even think about it anymore. Like we lock our cars when we leave our vehicles. You know, it's that. Crime is bad, lock your car. You don't think about it, you just do it. You might even, because of signal jamming, you might even feel your door. You don't even think about it anymore. And that's where we need to become compliant. The final thing, and I know you guys are dying from like boredom and stuff, but the final thing is FEEC. This is big. This should be top of everybody's world. On the 19th of December, 2022, car dealers became high-value goods dealers. And high-value goods dealers are accountable institutions like the banks and all the big things. And that creates a shift. Now, in your F&I department, because they're agents of the bank, FEEC is there. They were getting your ID and drivers and proof of address, proof of doing it. But that was mainly because they were financial services and they needed that because the bank said they needed that. But now what happens from the 19th of December is, and a lot of people didn't think about this, how do we onboard the Know Your Customer stuff in our workshops, in our parts departments, throughout our business? Do we have a process to onboard every single customer? Do we have a mechanism to check what type of customer it is and how much of the Know Your Customer are we going to apply to that? Because if I'm selling a car, it's over 100,000 Rand, it's a big thing. Even fraud risk means I should know who the guy is before I sell them the car. And I'll get your ID and your drivers, and if I've got lots of money, I can ping databases, I can pull UN terrorist 1264 lists, I can do cool stuff. I can check your ID, I can ping Home Affairs, I can do cool things. But do I really need to do all of that when you're buying a light bulb in your parts department? Well, if I tried to impose that on a customer, they'd look at me like I'm strange, and then they'd just go down the road and buy a light bulb. But I can't use that as the excuse to not do anything. So have you documented across your business, based on the level and type and risk of customer, what you're going to do? Because if you haven't documented it, you have to do everything. But if you have documented it, as long as it's legal, you're okay. And what does Directive 7 say, or Guidance Note 7, say? It says, well, until it's changed, and there's some issues here, but under 5,000 Rand, single transaction, you're allowed to apply things as easy as name, phone number, and no verification. But you can't do anonymous business. Anonymous business is illegal. But I don't need verified business. But you have to have that, because if you don't have that, what do you do? And if you're ignoring it in your parts and workshop, you're breaking the law with every single customer you're selling to. But you can't not sell to them. So again, costs no money to do this. It just costs time and being aware that you actually have to do that. That's what FEEC is. And you have to have risk management compliance programs. You have to have all of this. But a big thing, and I brought it up in a lot of our NADA meetings in the last week, is you cannot buy a toolkit box and just apply one broad stroke to every business. Because FEEC wants you, because of the FATF and government, to apply to your business. Your risk is different to the guy next to you. Because your risk tolerance is different, your product is different, and all of that is different because your customer is slightly different. Some you've known forever, whatever it is. You have to apply exactly to your business, and you will be assessed at what you say. So what do a lot of people do? They go to a consultant, they buy this beautiful thing that says, we are amazing and we do all of this cool stuff. But do you? Because if you didn't need to do it, and you're not doing it, you'll be assessed against what you put out. And then you'll be fined for something you really didn't need to go as far as. And those are the kind of things that FEEC is. Another big thing to keep in mind, and it's probably my last point on FEEC, is that, before we get to what the regulator says, is Directive 7. Directive 7 came out on really kind of the end of March, 4th of April. And what Directive 7 said is all high-value goods dealers, hopefully you know this, and I'm just talking to the converted here, but all high-value goods dealers had to provide on GoAML, which is the FEEC system, a full response to about 200 empirical questions for a period 1 January to 30 June, and by the 31st of July you had to have uploaded that all. Per org ID. And if your org ID is per dealership, that means per dealership. You're not allowed to do one. What the regulator has said, one is their response rate for high-value goods dealers is extremely low. So they're going to be looking for what's going on. The second thing they said, under Directive 6, which doesn't apply to us, that's the law firms, accounting firms and that, their response rate was shockingly low. They were given 30 days and they will be fined because they're registered. They know who they are. The database will just say, ping, 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 no you didn't, fine. The fine can be up to 10 million Rand. It probably won't be 10 million Rand, but they'll make examples out of it. What they have said is, if you haven't done it, they've kept it open, get it filled in. Doesn't matter if you're wrong. Fill it in. Submit. Then you'll be safe. So it's those kind of things. And what we're going to try and do as NADA, and with our partners, and how we're going to go forward to just keep giving you this value. There's just so much of this stuff. And the problem is this stuff isn't cool news stuff, so it doesn't get into the media, so you don't know about it, unless you have compliance officers and. But we're going to try, wherever possible in the future, add all this to a new version of our website. So it's there. You can just click into what we'll call it something, compliance legislation, whatever, and you'll just at least see. It's not advice. It's not telling you what to do. It's not giving you toolkits. It's telling you that this exists. Go check it out, because again, you don't want to be the guy who killed yourself to make Target and lose it all in a bad press release or a fine. Reputational risk is far more costly than a fine. And what the FEEC does more than anyone does, and the information regulator is also going to start doing this, and Discam got it first, is they're going to issue press releases about it. They're going to go out to the media and say, you did it wrong. Here's the name of the business, and this is what they did wrong, and this is how much we nailed them. That's reputationally a bit of a problem when a lot of your business comes from online referral. So what is the person doing online? They're researching, but they're also looking for anything negative about your particular dealer, because as a franchise dealer, if I really want to buy a Toyota, if I don't like you, I'll find another 113 Toyota dealers and they'll deliver from anywhere in the country. You don't want to be that guy that pings on the wrong thing. So that's what this is about. That's what the compliance is about. It's about using the law to your advantage to keep your customers safe, to keep your profits safe, to be the Rassie Erasmus working within the laws of the rugby game, showing the little lights. Innovative, not wrong. So that's what you need to do. It's not about spending the big money. It's about just doing it right. And the problem is we focus so much on selling the car, move the medal. Just move the medal, make target. And we forget, well, we're in this game to make money. Let's try and protect that reputation and that cash. So that's really what I kind of, there's a million other laws and a million other things, but these are top of mind. So that's what this was about. And if you are still awake and haven't slit your wrists yet, are there any questions? It's usually a no, because by now it's like, oh goodness, why did I do this? It's everybody. We're all in this together. You sell anything over 100K, you're in this. You macro, you're in this. So, it's not just us. So I'm not seeing questions, thank goodness. And nothing's coming up here. So just thank you again for your time, just from a NADA perspective, and back to Gary.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, you can see why we've got Brandon as the new NADA chair. He's a wealth of information. If you've got any questions, you've got our numbers. Please let us have it. You've got our email addresses. Please make sure you put the right classification on your emails, okay, now, from now on. So please just send it to us and we will put out notifications. We've run a bit longer than expected, but I think we've had a wonderful day. I think there's been a lot of good shared information. We've had some serious stuff. We had some light-hearted stuff. So thank you for giving up your morning. Before we close, when we leave, Renee will be at the back. If you want to grab a bite to eat, she'll give you a voucher. You can go into the restaurant and you can go have some lunch on us. So thank you for being here. But before we go, of course, you all sat around and everybody online stayed online because they want this. That's the only reason you guys came, was for this. So I have names that have been thrown into this little dish, and I'm swirling it around. And Brandon, you're going to close your eyes, you're going to pull it out, and then you're going to announce the winner, and then you can hand it over. If it's an online person, I don't know how you're going to get it to them, but you can try. Okay. So you lot better start praying it's you. Hey?
Brandon Cohen. No. Riley Reardon. Congratulations.
You go.
That's quite a big thing to carry, but at least but congrats, man. That is really cool.
It's all yours. You can put it on your wall. You can enjoy it. And thank you for being here today. And everybody else, thank you. That's it. And safe travel home. And thanks once again for being here.
Sure. Damn, that's cool.
Work experience.
I know, yeah.
Doesn't matter.
But how's that?